Welcome. Welcome to History Shitty Disciple, a place to critically think. With me, I have today his Discord name is Morbius, but his YouTube channel is The Warrior Philosopher on YouTube. And I'll be leaving links in the description down below for his social media. This is going to be an interview regarding masculinity, philosophy, as well as and the manosphere. Yeah, we were going to touch on that. We might touch a bit on politics as well if you're into that. Would you be interested in touching on your political views? Or
Yeah, for sure.
also, it's going to be a bit about his story, where he came from, what inspired him to make his channel. So, with that being said, take the stage. Let's Yeah, feel free to say whatever you want to say.
For sure. Well, thanks for having me on today. So my channel is the Warrior Philosopher. I started the channel back in September of last year, and I think it was really an effort for me to get back into reading, to get back into academic pursuits. For a long time, I had kind of strayed away from studying philosophy, uh, history, these sort of things. Where growing up, I was very big into that, and starting the channel sort of forced me to get back into reading, to get back into studying, and to get back into that pursuit of wisdom that I had sort of left behind for a little while. A little more context in regards to, I guess, my story. I'm currently in the military right now. I have about a year left in my contract. Uh, I'm an amateur mixed martial artist, and yeah, I guess I can't think of anything else right off the bat to say for an introduction. But that's kind of me. I'm 22 years old and living in California at the moment. But yeah,
I just realized my Discord. It wasn't quite
I guess concludes my introduction.
yeah, I just realized my Discord wasn't quite perfectly the screen wasn't quite perfectly angled. I just fixed that. Anyways, getting back to discussion, right?
Are you
So,
muted?
oh shit, yeah, I was muted. I'll have to take
Okay.
that part out. So basically, when it comes down to when it comes down to it, I guess I want to ask you, like, when did you start martial arts? Where was the where did it really begin? Your interest in martial arts, philosophy, politics,
Right.
critical thinking, and I guess you could say masculine pursuits.
For sure. So, in regards to martial arts, I've always had like a fascination with martial arts. I was a big fan of like Bruce Lee as a kid, and I was one of those kids that was in karate at a young age, but I don't really feel like that I really learned a lot about martial arts through that. I think nowadays, especially with karate specifically, it's really commercialized, and you hear the term Nick Dojo, for example. Like it's a lot of karate dojos have become businesses where a kid can go in there and he gets a brand new shiny belt, and it's this kind of cool aesthetic. Um, so I would say my real martial arts journey probably began in high school when I joined the my high school's wrestling team. And it's a lot different. You go from karate, where it's kind of like all about forms or katas, and you go to wrestling, which is as much a martial art as it is a sport. It's a lot more physically intensive, a lot more in your face. You're literally there grappling with another individual. Um, and around the same time, I also started Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and mixed martial arts the same time, about my freshman year in high school. And from there, I've so I competed all throughout high school in wrestling, and then later on, I competed in jujitsu tournaments, and then I had an amateur mixed martial arts fight in July of 2021, which I won. But since then, I haven't fought. Like I said, I'm in the military, and it's been pretty busy past year for me, so I haven't been training as much as I'd like to. That's something that I definitely need to get back into and put more time into. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey so far with martial arts. In regards to some of the other things you asked, so like where did my interest in philosophy come from? I'd say growing up, My dad is a big history buff, and he'd always read to me about like the Peloponnesian Wars or the Napoleonic Wars, all these different. There was always some war he'd be reading to me about. So as a young kid, I had a big interest in history, and growing up, say like middle school, high school time frame, I was really interested in politics, especially given that I think a lot of political discussion, especially where I come from. So I'm from California, and there's definitely very it's a very kind of straightforward view of how people view politics. There's not a lot of political diversity in terms of political ideas, especially where I grew up. Kind of city, San Jose, California. Pretty straightforward there. So I was, when you talk about critical thinking, that was a big thing for me growing up because I felt a lot of people weren't thinking critically. They were sort of treating the mainstream political thought as a moral absolute. And so my interest in politics eventually turned into an interest in philosophy because I felt like, and I still think this is true, if you really want to understand politics well, you have to understand the undertones of what make up political ideologies. And I think that's really what philosophy is. Obviously, the word philosophy is means literally the love of wisdom, philo and sophia. So without wisdom, without knowledge, without understanding, how humans, why and how humans tick, right? Like why are we here? What are we doing? All these different things, and you can't really understand politics either. And like I mentioned, back in September of last year, I kind of took it upon myself to get back into studying and to get back into reading and to get back and pursuing wisdom and that love of wisdom, which is philosophy.
Mm. I guess before I continue to ask you more questions about
Mhm.
I wouldn't mind bringing this up. Do you feel like maybe like because I feel like philosophy is one aspect to understand politics. I feel like the other aspect would be things like history and economics
Mhm.
because you can only learn so much about philosophy until you start to look at the outcome data of economics, and we can't do like do you know what a control trial is?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's basically like it's a experiment where you control for X factors. Like we can't do that with medical systems, but we can look across like something called cross-sectional studies. Like we can look back in history. We can look at case examples. We can sort of run cohorts like so
Mhm.
or a government could run its own control trials. Like it could set up two different medical systems in two different cities that control for a large amount of X factors, but that rarely happens. Generally, you'd have like two different towns, relatively similar cities, where they might have like two different systems to experiment. But like realistically, what I'm trying to
Mhm.
say here is like we can only learn so much. We can only like there's only so much data out there to answer so many different questions people might have about economics. So I
Mhm.
think that's really useful too, as well as history, to be able to look at the historical tendencies of politics. And when we look at history, it can essentially give us a better idea of what we ought to consider for the future, judging off of if past trends seem very similar to the past, to see if the past maybe is repeating. Like there's a lot that we can learn from the past, and there's a lot that we can learn from actual outcome data from economics. Like, what's your thought on that? Does that not is that like kind of like a side interest, or like why is philosophy something you're more interested in comparison to economics? Why did you not go down? Why didn't you end up pursuing a degree in economics like Thomas Sowell? Why become the warrior philosopher? Like, what was the
Well, there's
interest?
right. So first of all, I would say that I would say when you study something like economics, right? I think that's more of a specific field of study than say philosophy, for example. I think philosophy is more broad. Like I said, the word itself just means the love of wisdom. When you look at a lot of the great philosophers of our time, you mentioned history as well. History is a part of philosophy. some books I've been reading recently. I was reading Genealogy of Morals by Nietzsche, and then Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. And especially in regards to Spengler, Decline of the West is sort of this intersection of philosophy and history, and it's it's almost like when you see when you study philosophy, for example, you have to look at trends in the past, and it's kind of like what you're talking about, something to observe, right? Um, Especially in regards to Nietzsche's philosophy, it's all about how morality has developed over time and why it has developed that way. So, in the genealogy of morals, he talks about master and slave morality and how master morality essentially um, was this it's basically this idea, it's the morality of the strong essentially, it's those with the power to create their own morality, and then slave morality is the power of those, sorry, not the power, it's the
Well,
morality of the weak, it's the what's up.
I'd say the morality of lack of power.
Yes, exactly. And he uses historical examples to discuss this. He'll use, for example, in terms of slave morality, he talks about the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? And if you look at the history of the Hebrew people and the history of the early Christians, it was one of persecution and it was one of servitude, especially for the Hebrew people who were slaves under the Egyptians and the Babylonians. So I think that philosophy, to really understand philosophy, you do have to understand history. So I think that I don't. So when you ask like why not study this specific thing, I would say my answer would be that philosophy covers a broad range of topics. And then you mention economics, for example, and of course look at many of the great philosophers of history, they were also economists. So you look at John Locke, for example, more so Adam Smith or Karl Marx, right? These were guys who were philosophers, but their philosophy was based around economics, and so I don't think that so I don't think necessarily studying philosophy precludes you from being also well versed in things like history and economics. But I think if you just studied economics or you just studied history, that might preclude you from a wider range of topics that you could learn about. And just one more thing before we go on about economics, I feel that especially today, politics is dominated by discourse on the economy, by discourse on economic policy, and I think that it's a vast and gross oversimplification of the bigger dynamics that are going on since the Enlightenment, and since you have like the Industrial Revolution, since you have social hierarchies based on economic power rather than, you look at the feudal system. Kings were supposedly given the divine right to rule by God, or you looked at the dynasties in China, they had the mandate of heaven. They had this divine right to rule. You see a more metaphysical or spiritual backing behind social hierarchies. And now everything's condensed to economic social hierarchies. So the political discussion is all about economics. And I think that's, like I said, a gross oversimplification of the deeper things at play. It's very important, no doubt. But when you look at most of political discourse today, obviously there's still the big culture war going on. But the more quote unquote intellectual conversations that people are having are in regards to the economy. And I think while that's an important conversation to be had, it leaves a lot out of the picture.
Okay, so that was a wonderful response. Um, but I guess like a part of it, what somebody else could say in the comments is maybe like, well, a part of me is also referring to, I was referring to broadly, but is it just like what I'm guessing I'm trying to say here is like outcome data for economics? Is that something
Mhm.
that's kind of like a little bit more of a side interest for you, but not really a main interest?
So yeah, I would say that yeah, it's more of a side interest. I would say like if you look, so one of the big philosophical debates that took place throughout history was that between that of the rationalist and the empiricist, right? Um, and like empirical data, so like actually running experiments and coming up with this data is very important, no doubt. But I feel like the best way to approach pursuing knowledge in general is to have a strong base in reason, to have a strong base in being able to think without data. And then once you're able to think without data correctly, then you're in a lot better position to interpret data when you have it. It's like I'm big on the works of Miyamoto Musashi, and in the Book of Five Rings, he said perception is strong and sight weak. And what he meant by that was you can see something, you could have all that information at hand, but if you don't know how to use it properly, then it's sort of meaningless. So all this empirical data is really important. All these, like, especially in regards to economics, is really important. But I feel if you don't have a strong basis of reasoning and rationalization, then it's like, what are you going to do with these statistics? And you see it so much today. People skew statistics and come to the completely wrong conclusions. They'll look at data and they'll spit out all these facts, but what do they really mean without context? And that's kind of my view in regards to like rationalism versus empiricism in regards to reason versus actual like data.
Mind if I like relate this a little bit to like what I recently, the video I most recently made about crime data, and
For
I guess you
sure.
could say like doing research on the subject of veganism, like
Mhm.
misinterpretation of data.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I guess like for veganism, like for pro and anti-vegan arguments, there's lots of misinterpretations.
Mhm.
Um, one of which is obviously correlation doesn't always equal causation, but then it's also good to realize correlation is useful for causation. So I've heard both bad pro and anti-vegan arguments. So like when I try to like come up with a video, I really do try my best to like take a step back, and sometimes I realize I should not have said this or that, but it's usually quite
Mhm.
minor. And if it's really bad, I might leave like something in the description or a correction video. I did a
Right.
correction video once, because like some of the I said a few things that were wrong here and there. And I wanted to, but when it so like I feel like when people get data, I feel like interpreting that data properly or taking a more charitable stance on the interpretation of the data is very important.
Right.
Because it can easily lead to misinformation, lies. The only time where I might like over exaggerate it if someone says they want like a short, simplified answer.
Mhm.
And if like the evidence is overwhelming but not quite proven, like I might just, but like when it comes to the subject, because I'd rather go in depth and detail, but if you're not gonna listen, well, fuck it. But like when it comes to the subject of, because this is very relevant to Mister to politics. So in
Mhm.
Canada, I did two videos. The first one was kind of crappy about it, but the second one was really, really good. Um, oh yeah, and if you mention any of your videos, I'll actually put the thumbnail on the screen if you send me the thumbnails, or like if
Sure.
you send me the videos, I'll put the video on the screen in the podcast. I actually edit my podcasts.
Sounds good.
I'm psycho that way. Um, but basically, Mr. True, sorry, uh, LGBT hate crime has been rising in Canada. So I had to answer why. And I was in a really lazy mood and I did really fucking lazy research. And the
Mhm.
conclusion I came to was pretty obvious. It was repeat offenders are most likely the cause. Because around
Mhm.
half, 49% of people who commit hate crimes, not exclusive to the LGBT people, are repeat offenders. And the same people, 54% likely, come into contact with the police within 3 years. And there's been a bit of a revolving door in recent years, so much so that it's painfully obvious. Like literally one guy, like an actual guy who had you know, the child very inappropriate stuff on his computers, a
Mhm.
pimp. I think was he an attempted murder? I can't remember. He actually tried he got arrested. I think it was he had like a whole list of charges, got out of jail, shot a cop. Or did he run him
Oh,
over? I
jeez.
don't know. He killed a cop. There's another example that was really terrible. Like a guy in Saskatchewan back, like I think 2 years ago or a year ago. He he stabbed what was it? He got out of the prison system on like he had over 55 felonies, including like assault with weapon, attempted murder. Half of his charges was not showing up for court,
Oh,
and
jeez.
him and another person stabbed 10 people. I've heard the claim that from Aaron Gunn that he was able to get out because of his First Nation status.
Ah,
Uh,
gotcha.
so like I've already seen claim like I've already seen I think it was Aaron Gunn actually had on his documentary Canada's Dying that the NDP stated that they do wish to reduce First Nations arrest that they believe are
Mhm.
unjustified or what they deem as discrimination. But what was it like actually one of the I think one of the reforms for I can't remember if it's reducing minimum sentences were to try and the liberal government, they actually admitted that they wanted to try to minimize black people and First Nations are arrested. I'm going way off here, but basically,
Sure.
so the NDP, in which is like our social democrat, our far left party, brought
Hmm.
up the fact that these people are disproportionately being discriminated against. Um, there's the sexual orientation hate crimes on the rise, and they wanted to set up a 100-meter safety zone for LGBT people. In fact, it's already happened in the most conservative city in Canada, Calgary. I even read it in the second video. The second video is great actually, but
Hmm.
it's basically there's been restrictions on freedom of speech, and the NDP is trying to do this in Ontario. The NDP in Ontario, they're trying to bring up a 100-meter safety zone for LGBT people. And like when I was reading like the actual legal how it affects it legally, like the implementation of the very similar bill in Calgary, it was terrifying. It could shut down criticism regarding human rights. Like it was so vague, and how it could be interpreted is terrifying.
Right.
Like legally. So
Hmm.
basically, the federal government has sort of reduced minimum sentences. I think they've I've heard the claim that Bill C-75 reduced it created a bail reform that made it much easier for criminals to get bail. So it's actually been quite common for criminals as of late to get out of bail and be out back on the streets. Violent crime in Canada has increased. When crime hasn't really had a huge overall crime hasn't had a huge spike. Um, yeah, and hate crime has drastically gone up since around the time of Trudeau's implementation of Bill C-75, although I didn't bring that up. I'd have to do more research into Bill C-75, which I didn't want to go into because like I had already looked at all the other different possibilities. But anyways, I think you get the point. I ramble too much. I'm so sorry.
You're good.
But I think you get the example. Like basically,
Yeah.
the government is most likely creating the crime, and then they're coming in and trying to create the solution for the crime, most likely. And within all that problem, they also gain votes based off appealing to people who feel marginalized.
Hmm.
And it's a very sadistic cycle. Uh, you literally take some of the most marginalized people in your community and you just make it easier for people to to assault them and get away with it legally, and then you pander to them, and then you threaten to take away freedoms, and but I think I think you get the site. I think you get the point. It's like it's people aren't really thinking about what's being said in the media.
Hmm.
It like there's so many other stupid things I could have talked about, like the phrasing of it too. It was oh my god. But I think you get my point, right?
Yeah. No, I do.
Yeah, it's like it's pretty easy to go out there and read a bunch of studies, or it's easy to actually look for empirical facts
Hmm.
um before you have yourself spiritually centered. Like I've never actually read Friedrich Nietzsche, but I did look up the book reviews because I'm not a fast reader. I don't have the time. The thing about me is like I just do research videos. And my
Right.
last few videos were lazy. And for lazy research, it was pretty fucking good. Um and when I do good research, like those videos take like 2 or 3 months. Uh or like, it's good.
Hmm.
Um but how do I say this? What was it? I remember something that Friedrich Nietzsche said in a quote I heard. What was it? Is that he said I didn't understand what he meant by this, but it really reminded
Hmm.
what you said. Friedrich Nietzsche said, a man without culture would not know what to do without philosophy. Would not know what to do with philosophy. At first, I thought he was raised in a more primitive, conservative society, and he had this perception that society ought to be more conservative. not
Mhm.
necessarily because it's true or because it's beneficial or because it makes logical sense or even that it's good philosophy. Like it's something that it's a good idea that can stand the test of time. It took me a while to realize when you don't have an a baseline indoctrination to start with, like
Mhm.
the indoctrination of culture from your family, your mom, your dad. If you don't have a baseline, um, just some baseline level of culture
Mhm.
that you've been indoctrinated with, you are going to whatever you absorb, the first ideas you start to absorb, the first belief systems you start to absorb, you will absorb it as your culture.
Mhm.
How can you separate manipulation from philosophical value if you've never
Mhm.
had someone, a community, add philosophical value to you? And
Right.
this is where you and I could maybe see some of the more predatory ideologies, uh, you know, radical, I'll just say it, Islam, Islamic terrorists might use this. Um, you know, violent incel ideology. Well, I hate incel ideology. Violent incel, violent incel, violent incels spreading ideas of violence. What the yeah, like what the fuck is an incel ideology? It's kind of it is kind of a weird buzzword.
Sure.
Yeah, ideologies promoting violence to women that could be coming from incels. Um, I could even bring up feminism. I could bring up I could bring up like the alt right, and it's very similar. If you don't really have like a baseline of culture, um, and I think like
This
one of the
is
things. I'll finish. Like when you said like you
sure.
need to actually have like a better, uh, it's better to have a good stance on your own perception without empirical evidence. Like having some level of spiritual development that can
Mm.
sort of make you a healthy person to absorb empirical data, um, or at least a person with a healthy mindset for absorbing empirical data, can be useful.
Yes.
So that's what it kind of reminded me of. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's a pretty good way of putting what I'm trying to say there. And you mentioned Nietzsche, an interesting thing. Although he kind of sees the death of God, so to speak, or at least the allegory of the death of God, essentially the loss of religion in society. He does see it as an opportunity, but he also sees the very real negative effects that come from it. So one of the words that you'll hear a lot with Nietzsche's ideology is resentment. Not resentment, but resentment. And what it means is it's essentially the anger and the contempt and jealousy that the weak have towards the strong. So you look at let's look at European history and how it changed from the medieval era to the Industrial Revolution and to the current day. And originally, within most of European history, uh, you have social hierarchies that are based upon the feudal system, which is solidified through Christianity. So when I talked about before, I think I mentioned this earlier, that the Christian kings were given a divine right to rule by God Himself. So this resentment that people have, this contempt and this anger, because they are suffering, and those who are powerful are benefiting off of that suffering. Without religion and without something like culture, without something that solidifies social hierarchies, uh, they're going to they're going to direct this anger and this contempt, this resentment towards the people at the top, because this is where they feel all the hardship is coming from. They direct it at the top. But what religion does, and what religion did for a long time up until recently, was it allowed the priestly classes to redirect this resentment inwards. Now, with Christianity, it's, well, because your suffering and your hardship are necessary for you to receive eternal salvation afterwards. So instead of looking at their suffering and directing it towards the powerful and saying, okay, they're making us suffer, we're going to take them off their pedestal, it instead tells them, no, it's actually good that you're suffering. It's good that you're in pain. It's good that you're poor, because that is what's going to lead you to heaven. That's what's going to lead you to eternal salvation. And you sort of see this in the Beatitudes as well, like "Blessed be the poor in spirit, for they will enter the kingdom of God." I'm kind of paraphrasing it, but the Beatitudes are essentially listing all these things that we will accept as negative, like "Blessed are the poor," "Blessed are the hungry," all these different things, and they're saying these are the individuals who are going to be given entrance into the kingdom of heaven. And for a long time, religion, and this sort of goes in conjunction with culture, held this resentment in place. It held the slave classes in place because they felt, okay, well, this suffering, it's for a purpose. It's for us to receive eternal salvation. But as you have this allegorical death of God, you start to have all this resentment pointed upwards. And this resentment that's pointed upwards is very, very easily co opted by predatory people or people that have predatory ideologies, like you mentioned. So, for example,
Mm.
you have the French Revolution, and not to say that the French Revolution was necessarily bad, but what happened right after the French Revolution? France became a dictatorship right after that. So this idea of all the sort of lower class French peasantry rising up and beheading the king and queen of France. It's this resentment that they feel towards the upper classes who are living in luxury, who are living in finery, and taking them down because the religious authority of God is a lot weaker at this point in European history. By the time you get to the 1700s, you already have the Protestant Reformation. You have all these different sects of Christianity. You have the Church of England. So the Catholic authority is a lot weaker. It doesn't have that same pull of the past. And a better example would be the Bolshevik Revolution in terms of a predatory ideology feeding off the people and using their anger to put their ideology in power. So you look at Marxist ideology, for example, it's the embodiment of slave morality. It's, condensing the social hierarchies economically to bourgeois, the wealthy class, and the proletariat, the working class. And um, it's exercising this class warfare to completely get rid of the bourgeois and to make everyone a proletariat, to take the means of production and give it to the proletariat. So it's this embodiment of slave morality. Those who are defined by their opposition. So in this case, the weak hate the strong, they hate the powerful,
Hold
and the
on.
only yeah.
So slave, it sounds like to me slave morality is a morality where you enslave yourself to something other than yourself. So which could either
And
mean a god or enslaving yourself to your enemy.
so I would say it's more so the enemy, right? So slave morality, just to summarize it really quickly, master morality, in master morality, you create your values first based on power and strength, and you pick your opposition based on individuals who exhibit the opposite traits, so exhibit weakness, for example. And through slave morality, you pick your enemies first. You look at the things you don't like, and you consider what you consider good is the opposite of the things you hate. So,
Yeah,
for
but
example, if you're poor, you hate wealth. You
could,
hate exorbitant wealth.
couldn't someone technically have a belief system with a god where they don't
Mhm.
actually necessarily look at the things that they hate first?
Exactly, and that's why Catholicism or Christianity religion was so successful, and that is
No. I'm
an
saying
example
if
of slave
no.
morality.
I'm saying like, would it still be slave morality? Because I haven't read enough about Nietzsche. Would it still
Mhm.
be slave morality if someone had a god, but they approach things maybe from a stance that would be more similar to master morality, but they enslave themselves to that god still?
To an extent, and that's kind of why I brought
Yeah.
up the
So
example.
I think so. Yeah. Like I think. Okay. So like I think like my description also kind of has some merit there. So like because it wouldn't be fully master morality even if you had the traits of which you pursue the things that you find desirable within your values and not the things that you particularly hate first, um or find undesirable. But yeah, continue. It's just I kind of want to have a better understanding, but yeah, continue. You can talk about what you were talking about.
For sure. Really quick, just because I think this might help you with your understanding. The reason why I would consider, for example, the Germanics or the Romans to have exhibited master morality is just look at their gods. Their gods aren't completely just. Their gods are much like humans. They have faults and they have flaws, but they're powerful. that is why they are the gods. But the Christian God is supposed to be
Sorry, which
merciful.
gods was this? Nordic or
I
Greek?
was giving you so I was giving you an example of Greek, basically more pantheistic
Okay,
pagan
yeah,
gods,
yeah,
like the
yeah.
Greek gods and the Norse gods. They're not perfect. And they exhibit more human characteristics. And I think this sort of illustrates the difference between master and slave morality to a sense, because you have one specific religion's gods being gods because they are powerful, whereas the other religion, like the Judeo-Christian religious religion's god, is the god because he is merciful and because he is all good. So there's this difference there, right? That's just a quick little tidbit.
Hmm.
Um, Going back to what I'm discussing in regards to the Bolshevik Revolution, it is the embodiment of slave morality because it is condensing, it is saying, okay, we are the proletariats. We are not rich. We are poor. We don't have the means of production. So we hate those with the means of production. We hate the rich. We hate the wealthy. We hate the powerful. And there's all this resentment that the peasantry in Russia had towards the noble class, and rightly so. They endured a lot of hardships at the behest of the powerful, but the Bolsheviks to take were able to take this anger and use it to put themselves into power. And as you know, the Soviet Union didn't successfully create an egalitarian society. This created a new oligarchy based on different things rather than being based on the aristocracy
Hey,
or the nobility before.
hey,
It's now
hey,
based upon the political elite. Mhm.
hey, bro. It's all just American lies. The Soviet
Read
Union was
Animal Farm.
perfect. Soviet Union was perfect. Nobody ever died. It's all American lies. Everything bad in Cuba is all American lies. Actually, I literally had a communist knocking on my door telling me everything that bad happened in Cuba, almost everything,
Uh-huh.
is all American lies. And like I looked at the guy, gonna be really harsh here. Wasn't the most attractive, really scrawny. I take one look at him, I think to myself, what type of person would like he just seems like the typical person who would look at the strong or those who have more
Mhm.
and be able to, I guess like you said, maybe have some resentment, but he just seems like the typical person who's weak and sympathizes with a message that appeals to the weak.
Absolutely.
Um
And that's a perfect example of someone exhibiting slave morality.
yeah, so what was it? There's actually a number of things I wanted to, a number of ideas. First off, the quote where Nietzsche said, apparently, I think it's like in the Downfall of the Greeks. I listened to like a
Mhm.
1 hour video where someone went over like some of the really powerful quotes they thought, and that
Yeah.
was one that stuck with me because I realized that quote was insanely true to this day.
You say the fall of the Greeks?
Yeah, or something
Okay.
like that. The Downfall of the Greeks. Because
Interesting.
more or less his view is like the he kind of saw the changes in morality to be a sickness of man. You know, the
Mhm.
changes towards slave morality. But next thing I want to say is like
And
I remember. Oh,
yeah.
you will go.
I was just going to say something really quick about Greeks. Interesting enough, what Nietzsche identifies as a breaking point or a changing point of Greek morality is actually the inception of post-Socratic thought. So basically, Nietzsche, while admiring aspects of Socrates, he was actually highly critical of Socrates as well, because before Socrates, you have a lot of nuance in regard to morality. You have what Nietzsche would call more people being more in touch with their Dionysian side, so the more kind of animalistic human nature, and this is like illustrated through Greek tragedy where the
Mhm.
hero isn't necessarily a good guy. So you have like Achilles or Odysseus. Like Odysseus literally cheated on his wife with like 30 different women before he finally came home to her 10 years later, He's not the
Chad.
perfect guy, right? I mean, hey, he still loved his wife. He rejected immortality with like the hottest god ever, Calypso, to be with his wife. So come on, he is a good guy kind of. But, you get my point. He's not purely a good guy. There's nuance to him. There's nuance to Achilles. You look at Hector. Hector was one of the best people in the Iliad. He wasn't the hero of the Iliad. And with Socrates, Socrates represents the shift from tragedies to what you would call Aesopian fables. And for listeners that aren't familiar with what the Aesopian fable is, it's essentially a short story with like two animals, for example. So the tortoise and the hare is an example of Aesopian fable. It's there's clearly a good and a bad person. The tortoise is good because they take their time. The hare is bad because they're lazy and they stop before the finish line. And the reason Nietzsche is very critical of this is because you take away all the nuance and you clearly say this is right and this is wrong. So he was very critical of Greek morality going from the tragedy to the Aesopian fable, going from a lot more nuance in in their morality to what Socrates, Socrates and then his students Plato, Aristotle, a lot of what they represent is this idea that the pursuit of knowledge, purely the pursuit of knowledge, is what is most virtuous among men, and clearly there's a lot of good to that, but it sort of leads to the denial of the human condition. It leads to a
The will,
denial
the
of
power,
human nature.
the will, the
That
power.
too, that relates to it as well. So that's I didn't mean to go off on a huge tangent, but just because when you mentioned Nietzsche and Greece, I it made me think of that.
Yeah, so I think the other thing I wanted to mention, so like when I was watching Berserk, it was like 2016, there was a character called Fernese. So she was like a Christian.
Mm,
Um, she took part in the witch burnings, hunting down witches. So basically, like there's actually a video going over like the Friedrich Nietzschean uh like ideology and how it sort of represents itself in the anime and manga Berserk, which I would say has more symbolism and philosophical depth than almost anything you'll read nowadays. Like any
interesting.
piece of like media. So basically,
Mhm,
this person, something that the main character Guts said to this person, which is my icon. It's from
mhm,
the anime. When he was arrested, he said this to her like, your what was it? I can't remember exactly his words, but I think it's something along the lines of like, your words is as hollow as your God.
mhm,
Um, and she snapped and she started whipping him, and he didn't cry or anything. He was like getting shredded
mhm,
like he was bleeding. But afterwards, she was whipping herself because she felt some level of sexual attraction to him.
mhm.
So I guess maybe like a way for the audience to absorb this. Imagine if someone felt sexually attracted or aroused and they saw that as sinful. They saw that as bad. Um that then goes if someone perceives their desire as bad, that desire goes, what was it? It's easy to blame yourself for your own desires.
Right.
And that would be a good example of slave morality. Now when it comes to like I want to talk about the concept of what was it? Resentment. And so I
Mhm,
think I can see two things. Like one example I could bring up is like feminism.
mhm,
Um because like I'm going to preface this, so like there is so many different like definitions that like feminism, individualism, even though I haven't read the full like read everything I can about it, I'm more
mhm,
aligned to it. So but when it comes down to it, a lot of feminism want a lot of their desires is to, like, philosophical, a lot of their desires to deconstruct quote unquote patriarchy.
mhm.
And this sort of, and it becomes very obvious why a lot of them are more left leaning, socialist, liberal, social democrat, capitalist liberal, which is all fine, but it's very was it when you actually think about the actual productivity through, let's say, patriarchy or some of the benefits, you might overlook any potential benefits to it if you already resent the powerful, or if you resent someone for having power over you without considering if said power is justified or there's any advantage to that. And you could
Right.
apply that same reasoning to economics. You could apply that reasoning to violent misogynists, the resentment, incels.
Mhm,
Rather than looking at the disparities and asking yourself if it makes sense that it exists or if it's a good thing, um, or asking yourself, why do they have something that you don't?
Mhm.
Um, it can make it much easier for someone to actually prey upon that. But here's the thing. Here's the one of the issues is like once we identify the problem, identify issues in society. I think in order to solve some of these problems, someone has to get over, like you said before, that resentment. Like someone has to overcome their own personal, internal demons, their own prejudices, in order to actually have a rational, sound mind, to be at a
Mhm.
spiritually healthy level, to absorb the empirical facts, and then to sit down and to actually consider what are the problems and what is the best thing that can be done to help society in some shape or form. And I think one of the reasons why I bring up feminism is just because, like, when you think about patriarchy, like, what was it? It's not inherently a good or bad thing, male leadership.
Mhm.
And if it is something that, let's say, most girls desire, a guy who's more dominant, a guy who's more ambitious, like, most girls don't desire submissive, quiet guys. Most girls don't desire a guy to be a stay-home dad, and not to shame any woman who wants to be the breadwinner. That's not the point of this. I'm not saying go out there like I'm just saying like if it's not something that people genuinely want, then why is it a bad thing, patriarchy, if it emerges? So it's both having the desire for it and the resentment towards it. Um, but also, like, Thomas Sowell talks a lot about the correlation with the welfare state and
Mhm. Yeah.
divorce rates in the black community. Keep in
Mhm.
mind, it's intellectually dishonest to blame this purely on the left because the war on drugs through
Mhm.
Richard Nixon definitely played a huge role. And it was even self admitted by, I believe it was self admitted by his administration, that the war on
Mhm.
drugs was essentially started to arrest minorities, particularly black people who were more likely to vote liberal, and
Mhm.
white liberals who were more likely to smoke weed, just like black people.
Mhm.
Um, so the divorce rate, like, so basically the black community is in chaos because of both the right and the left. But I believe Thomas Sowell talks a lot about the correlation with divorce rates skyrocketing around the time where welfare came out. And not to say that's always a bad thing. Obviously, in certain circumstances, when you have a violent man in the household, sometimes it's safer to get those kids away from him. There are
Mhm.
certain men who they deserve what they fucking get.
Right.
Um, so this isn't like a gotcha women. Ha. Know your place. No, it's like if I was to like quote unquote make an argument of a place, I'd have to like have a good position. But like what I'm trying to say here, it's easy to look at disparities and inequalities without asking yourself if it makes sense or if it's justified. Like for example, if someone's really intellectually talented, whether they're an artist, a scientist, they have a skill set in something that makes them superior. If we were to pay everyone equally,
Mhm.
one thing that we can already empirically see in the real world, historically, but even to this day, is brain drain. When
Mhm.
someone of a higher skill talent, such as a doctor, a teacher, etc., and they're not getting as paid in country A in comparison to country B, if they have an option to immigrate, they will go there to work there to make more cash.
Right.
So brain drain is happening all across the world. It happens in Europe, it happens in Canada, it happens in the EU, it happens, the United States takes a lot of brain drain from around the world, or has been. God knows if that will continue.
Mhm.
But I think like the important point I want to get at here is uh basically I think I kind of mostly got at it, but it's basically if we do not have an emotionally fair and an emotionally calm, curious mindset to understand things from different angles, when we identify problems without some level of religious dogma, we're just going to have some sort of predatory ideology. And for the most part, I would see feminism as quite predatory. In the
Mhm.
same way I see like the red pill community as predatory. Um, in the same way I would see kind of religious predatory. Like when we look at it, like what was it? The definition of feminism is like the advocacy for equality for women's rights to men, which is really strange because like there's nothing against advocating for women's rights. That's a good thing. We need
Mhm.
people to advocate for certain inequalities. But like, when was the last time you heard a feminist bring up the statistic of marital rape, which actually happens? You'll generally hear about the wage gap, etc. You'll hear about social justice issues, but I even had one of the studies I brought up in my Thomas Sowell video is looking at tenure, even in a union that basically they paid their employees off tenure, which was
Mhm.
like how long they've been there, their position in the company. Not necessarily,
Mhm.
it's not necessarily a meritocracy. Men still got paid more, even in a union where men were more willing to work more hours. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say here is when it comes to a lot of the problems in our society, I feel like the left has really done a really good job in recent years. Sort of, I hate to get like political. The right does this too, but the right has religion. But I'd say in recent
Mhm.
years, the left has created a new ideological dogma: social justice, feminism, or maybe they've always had it. But people might vote left, not necessarily because their politician is a rationally reasonable character, which some of them probably are, but some people might
Mhm.
vote left because they already have a disposition that there's something that is a problem within the economy based off of an underlying assumption that therefore requires less evidence to to really be convincing for that individual or satisfactory. And within that, within all the resentment, even in the modern day, we're seeing like there was a huge spike in racism online during the refugee crisis in 2015. I'm not sure if you were online for then, but even to this day, there was like
Mhm.
there's a lot of gendered politics. There's a lot of gender baiting. There's a lot of misogyny, misandry. I'd probably
Mhm.
say like back in 2012, 2010, I probably saw more misandry online, more like stuff hating on men. But nowadays,
Mhm.
it's overwhelmingly like when you look at dating podcasts. Probably I'm more so referring to like the fresh and fit goons,
Mhm.
um, who like their false flag videos. There's a lot of misogyny,
Mhm.
like lots of misogyny, and I think like a large portion of this is like without God, without something that unifies us, that enslaves us. It's easy to look at a belief system and then to blame those more powerful. Blame the guy who's getting all the girls. Blame all the girls who don't want to be with you. Blame all the men for inequalities. Blame the patriarchy. It's easy to actually fall into an ideology where you hate those who you see those who have more power than you.
Mhm.
And I won't lie, I feel kind of depressed in the modern day. I kind of feel like um I feel like modern society has failed Nietzsche. Like I
Mhm.
often talk about this the UBC study on monogamy. Like
Mhm.
non-monogamous societies tend to have more violence, etc. Like I just want to say this.
Mhm.
Like if I had two girls who fell in love with me, there's the possibility. Hate to say it, I might have a relationship with both of them if like they're both bi. Like I'm not a perfect man either. I'm not spreading hatred towards people who are not in a monogamous relationship, but I'm not going to go out there and say that like a non-monogamous relationship is quote unquote good for society. Uh, Basically, monogamous societies tend to have less sexual violence, physical violence. It just tends to be better for the kids when everyone's genetically related within the household. Um, it Yeah, it just less kidnappings, less a lot of bad stuff. Violence,
Mhm.
also better gender equality. Um, So basically, like everything, just overwhelmingly, in my opinion, seems to have a more favorable outcome when it comes to valuing a person
Mhm.
in a monogamous society. And then when I look at the modern day, what I see right now is I feel as if resentment is the mainstream culture, and I feel
Mhm.
like the people like I feel like people of today Like if failing, if if when I say failing Nietzsche, I mean like failing to create a society that truly replaced God,
Mhm.
and a more enlightened society. I feel like the modern society has truly failed, and I feel as if all the different ideologies seeking to weaken the individual into a mindset of slave morality. I feel like that's the mainstream culture. What's your
Mhm.
thoughts?
I so here's why I don't think they failed Nietzsche yet, because Nietzsche has had predicted the kind of phenomenon you're talking about, and he never really put a time frame. But the idea is that with the death of God, the Ubermensch comes into place and sort of replaces God as that individual who sort of trans that individual transcends morality, and then his power, his or her power, ends up defining the new the new doctrine of what that morality would be. So I think that there's still a long time, for this sort of thing to happen. But I think what Nietzsche is getting at, right, and something that I think relates to what we're talking about as well. The biggest issue, and here's the thing, Nietzsche's philosophy, the way he wrote it, was not written for everyone to read. It was written for a select few people who sought this sort of philosophy, who wanted to be more. But the problem is with the Enlightenment, and you see a lot of with Nietzsche, and then a lot of the philosophers that come out of Nietzsche. And when I mean come out of, I mean like or inspired by him. You have a lot of critique of the Enlightenment, and I think this is the fundamental shift in history where we see the foundations of the resentment and the sort of cult of victimhood that exists today. See, the problem with the Enlightenment is that it sought to give everybody equal power. Now, it goes about through two different ways. One way is there's liberalism and then there's Marxism. Now, in liberalism, there's this idea that through the free market, through social fluidity, anyone who puts in enough effort can reach that position of economic success. Now, obviously, this has proven to be a bit of a idealization. Not nearly as
Maybe unpractical is the best word. It's like it doesn't keep in mind probability and social mobility. But yeah, continue.
right. Yeah. But then you see Marxism, which, I have to give credit to liberalism, uh, even with its flaws. And, I'm a big critic of liberalism, not just neoliberalism, but also classical liberalism. But even, I can say that, well, they did a hell of a lot better than Marxism, which, essentially now the Marxist approach to these sort of ideas of the Enlightenment is to just make everything down the line economically equal. So it's not about social fluidity or social mobility. It's just about establishing a clear-cut order. It's like you said, you have the people who get burnt out because, a Cuban doctor is not making nearly as much money as a Cuban taxi driver. The reason why? Well, the Cuban taxi driver is being paid by tourists, right? So he's getting paid through a private exchange. So of course they're going to want to move to like the United States or a country where they're going to get more money for it. It just doesn't work. Brain drain, like you talked about, right? So the issue with the Enlightenment is the idea that everybody, in one respect or another, should have some sort of equal amount of power and representation in a society. So the liberal approach to this, like I said, through free market, through individual liberties, technically the idea behind a democracy, or even a representative democracy like a republic, is that each individual should, in theory, have an equal vote, right? Now the problem with this is somebody like you or me, not to sound egotistical, but I'm sure we can attest that we probably have a better understanding of policy than, a lot of people would. There, the some crackhead on the
Like
street has the same
to
vote as me
be
or you.
to be fair, the warrior philosopher, I'd consider the average person to be incredibly stupid.
Well, there you go. That works.
And
That works for my
that
purposes
level
too.
of stupidity, it's known as normal intelligence.
Mhm.
And yes, I'm insulting you, the audience. But if you're being insulted, I want you to know there's a greater level of anti. Oh God, I already said the word. I Artardation. There's a greater level of anti-artardation. It's called doing well with the information that you have. You don't have to be super intelligent. It's more important to do well with the information you have. But a lot of people are just average intelligence. And one of the problems
Mhm.
with this is that they really lack I think intelligence quite often creates the curiosity that makes people pursue more knowledge,
Mhm.
you know.
Right.
Sometimes it's the other way around, but yeah. No, yeah, I don't think you're tooting your own horn. I do think we're probably smarter than the average person.
Right. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because of the Enlightenment, it's this idea that everybody has some sort of God-given right. And I'm using God-given as an allegory because obviously to the Marxist, religion is the opiate of the masses, but it does come from Christianity. People don't realize that even Marxism is rooted in Christian ethics. Um, throughout especially European history, Christianity is the first real utterance of all men are created equal under God, and also obviously it took a long time for that to actually become a literal translation in terms of, okay, well, people get equal say in government, but there's a lot of issues that come from this idea that everyone should have an equal representation in terms of being involved in power, because then people get these ideas that you talk about all these people that start to blame others for their problems, and you talk about these predatory movements. Well, the problem is that you have, let's say you we there's let's say that I'm with you and eight other people. There's 10 of us, and we're all pretty intelligent people, and we're all talking, we're all having a conversation, you know, doing our thing. Now, our capabilities as 10 people might be greater than that of like 100 idiots, right? That are on the street. But through this enlightenment tradition, through the ideologies that stem from it, especially liberal ideologies, uh, it takes all that away. It takes all that power that comes from capability and it distributes it. So then you have a lot of people with a voice and with an opinion that really shouldn't have it. And this sounds very elitist of me, and maybe it is, but it's just the truth. There are so
No,
many people that have
no,
a
no,
voice
go,
that
go, go,
shouldn't have a
go.
voice.
Yeah, go, go,
Yeah.
go, go,
yeah.
go.
Sure. I just say there are a lot of people that have a right to an opinion, like, and they exercise that right to an opinion, but they really aren't saying anything. And they're sort of wasting, there's only a certain amount of time in the day and they're wasting it. There's only a certain amount of coverage you can have in like media or in politics or whatever, and they're wasting it because the post-enlightenment tradition and the post-enlightenment moral absolutism tells us that we should all have an equal representation and power, even though you might be less capable than another person. So that's why you have all these groups of weak individuals bunching together because, even within this framework of they have equal representation, they're still incapable of getting anything done because they are incapable individuals. And they've been told that they've been lied to, really, that they have the same capabilities as anyone else to enact change or to push their movements forward. But in the past,
I
in the
think
state of nature, what's up?
I think really what it is like the extension. I think what it is it's the obsession of equality,
Yeah, absolutely.
especially in a economic scarcity, especially within an economy that has a scarcity. Like if we
Mhm.
reached a post scarcity society, some of these things economically might not be much of an issue. But realistically, practically, when we have scarcity, it is a goddamn issue. Inefficiency.
Sure. But, even within that, I mean, would you consider the United States a scarcity economy?
Yeah, well, like we all have scarcity. Like economics is a study of scarcity. Like it's really curious. What are we gonna call economics when there's no longer scarcity? Because it is the study of
Right.
scarcity. I know it's a funny little thought, isn't it? Hey,
Mhm.
um, but
Let's take
yeah,
out the word scarcity for a second, right? Really quick. Let's take out the word scarcity, but let's look at access to comfort or access to basic subsistence. For the most part in the United States, most people, without too much difficulty, can have access to basic subsistence, right? Um, so,
mm,
it's almost, what's up?
no, I was green. I was green.
Okay. Yeah. So like it's almost like what you're describing, like what happens when it's gone. I would argue that we're almost at that level. And here's the thing, right? And this is something that's pointed out by a very controversial philosopher. I don't know if you ever heard of Julius Evola, But he talks about the reason why Marxism doesn't really work. And the reason why Marxism doesn't work is because all these Marxists who want to take the means of production from the proletariat, or sorry, from the bourgeois and give it to the proletariat, well, they look at the United States and they say, hey, how come the poorest American is living better than me? Here's a best illustration of that. So you know the movie Grapes of Wrath? Or sorry, the book. What am I talking about? The book Grapes of Wrath,
No,
right? Okay, so essentially it was
like
a book.
like Warrior
It's
Philosopher. I work out like 3 to 4 days a week. I make YouTube videos and I work a full-time job. So
no, you're good.
yeah,
Um, no, but it's an old book. So basically, it took place during the American Depression, right? And it highlights a lot of economic inequality that existed in the time. But the reason I bring this up is because they made it into a movie, and for a little while, this movie was very popular in the Soviet Union because the Soviet politicians were like, "Hey, here's a movie made in America about Americans that shows all the horrible things that the Americans have to go through. Let's let our people watch this." And most American movies obviously were banned in the Soviet Union. Well, it was on, for like, let's say, a few weeks, and then they pulled the movie. You know why they pulled the movie?
why?
Because the Soviet people said, wait a minute, these poor Americans have a car, and none of us have a car. So even the worst, poorest, most economically downtrodden Americans still represented affluence and prosperity to the average Soviet Union individual. So the idea is that when all this, if your whole ideology is basically based on economics, and you see that even in this corrupt society where the bourgeois have the means of production,
Uh,
when their lowest live better than your average, then it's like, well, what
I
am I
mean,
doing
I
anymore?
mean, I mean, it wasn't purely based on economics. It was also based on like a desire for equality.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to talk about like how
I
it's
mean,
supposed to be, right?
well, it wasn't necessarily that. It's supposed to be like I think Marxism, and I could be wrong. I think
Mhm.
it's a more complex ideology that seeks to remove class from a society, whereas Karl
Where's
Marx.
class not?
Hmm?
All right, go ahead. I was
I
gonna
could
say,
I could
where's
be
where's class
wrong.
not involved in economics
I'm
though?
not.
Where in
One sec. Let me just.
just because I feel like with Marxism, class is all the distinctions of class are made on economic lines within Marxism. It's in the
Um.
word, right? Defining the
Well,
powerful as the
it's
bourgeois and the weak
not
as the
necessarily
proletariat.
this. Um.
There's no metaphysical aspect of the social hierarchies that Marxism is trying to eliminate. Religion is the opiate of the masses. I think, and like I could be wrong too, but I feel that Marxism condenses social hierarchies and it condenses the differences of class to economics, and that's like the fundamental aspect of the distinction.
Yeah. I mean, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you're not. Yeah, it's just a better articulation is like it's also like it's a Marxism is a social. It's both a social and a political and an economic philosophy. Whereas basically communism is one of the means of which I mean, like, I'm not sure what the relation is between Marxism and communism. I haven't read extensively on it, but
Mhm.
if I had to take a guess based off of like my past education, past memory, I think Marxism is trying to remove class. Karl Marx may have seen or perceived. I think I watched a video from like what was it, Crash Course,
Mhm.
where he personally believed. I think Karl Marx. I could be speaking my ass, but I think more or less
Yeah.
they wanted to create a society that was more natural and it wasn't inflated with social class. Um, and I think like um, and I think obviously like that is objectively false. I mean, like historically, very like much fewer men historically have passed on their genes. Like you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, societies were not they were not equal for everyone.
Mhm.
It has never been that way. Like it could be that it could be like resources can be shared more, but even then, like you're still going to have certain people that rise to the ranks. I'm sure a lot of Marxists would agree that would exist in a Marxist society that there's certain people that have more status or have more popularity, but what was it? I think the point I'm trying to get at here is I think communism, Marxism, are two different things. But yeah, it wasn't purely just based on economics. It was also based on a social goal.
Yeah, that could
And
be.
they also,
I'd have to look more into it.
I think Karl Marx, I believed he wanted the state to like slowly whittle away, which wasn't the
Yeah,
case. It just became, it just ramped up with power. It was just an
it's the
angry
same with
fucking
Lenin as
machine.
well. Lenin also wanted to eliminate the state eventually. He saw the state as necessary to enforce these ideals within the proletariat working class, and eventually the idea was that these communes would break down into smaller and smaller groups, and eventually you just have this utopian paradise. But that's, for lack of better words, stupid. Like social hierarchies exist in every single organism in this world that live within a social group. Every single animal or being that lives in a social group has a hierarchy, from ants all the way to lions to wolves or whatever, right? It's inherent that those with power, and not just based on physical strength, because even if you look at like chimpanzees, for example, it's not necessarily the strongest chimpanzee that is the leader of the chimp tribe or chimp clan. It's the most well-rounded mixture of strength, intelligence, sociability. So it's like inevitably in every single, so you talk about what's natural to the human condition. I'd say that communism is probably furthest from the natural human condition as you can go. Because when you try to get rid of social hierarchies, regardless if they're economic social hierarchies or more metaphysical social hierarchies, they exist everywhere. And like, let's say you created this sort of utopian anarcho communist collective where you have, 100 different, let's just see for a hypothetical, for like a little thought experiment. You have 100 people that live in, each of them has like 100 acres of land. It's inevitable that eventually two of those guys are going to come together and say, hey, there's two of us. We can easily take Bobby's farm. We outnumber him. And they do that. And now they have three farms worth of production. And they take another farm and they take another farm. People inherently desire more than they have if they have the means to take it.
I
So it doesn't
mean,
matter if, you know what I
I'm
mean?
not sure if I agree with that. My argument, like, usually against communism is greed is the extension of self-interest once your society has upscaled to the point where you're no longer associated with your neighbor. Sharing resources might be within your self-interest when you're in a small community and everyone looks after each other and takes care of each other. But when you upscale something, people are no longer closely associated with one another. And one of the other problems too is that there's also the possibility of invasion of an
That's what I'm
enemy
talking
force.
about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. So yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's always inevitable.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say here is even if like the community is perfectly stable, even
Mhm.
if there's a small communist society of 20 people, 30 people, which I think on a small scale people can share resources and things can be fine. But
Sure,
once
until they
you
get invaded.
yeah, 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 yeah. So definitely those types of societies would probably serve better when they're being like protected, like under the radar of like an actual state or something.
Right, and that
Uh,
state is not communist.
yeah, 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 yeah. In other words, like for example, like a bunch of fucking hippies in the woods somewhere that we don't know
Yeah.
about. 20 of them sharing resources, like, um, but more or less yeah, I think like essentially greed becomes human nature once you're no longer attached to your neighbors. Your selfish interest is no longer a part of your community. You can indoctrinate someone to believe in the community, and some will, but I a lot of people won't.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if there's complications with that. Maybe you could indoctrinate everyone to believe, but I think even if people believe uh it is within their self-interest, like to what extent will people challenge, like at what point will someone challenge that belief? At what point will that belief die out?
That's
Um
what I mean, yeah.
so yeah, like for example, there's like bribery existed within the Soviet Union if I had to take a guess. Um what was it? A lot of the ex-communist countries are incredibly corrupt. Like
Mhm.
a lot of the poverty created a poverty can create it has the potential to create a culture for bribery, which I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of ex-Soviet or ex-communist nations suffer from that. But if this was like a community where somebody is ripping off their best friend or their neighbor, that's a lot harder.
Mhm,
Like, it would be much easier for me to, like, rip someone off than you off or one of my close friends. I wouldn't be able to that's something I don't think I could do.
mhm,
But, when you don't know the person next to you, essentially when people come into like big conglomerate groups, the individuals are easily crushed into it's a hyper compet like basically what I'm trying to say is like from a genealogical standpoint, we
mhm,
just become really hyper competitive in larger environments, larger cities. People become more choosy with who they can potentially have a partner with because there's so many options. Some
mhm,
people will drown in the options and they will not be able to secure what they want. People become more competitive for better pay. And even if you try to make everyone even if you try to make everyone's pay equal, there's also a possibility people might try and take bribery in a community that has no community, in a community that is really just a competitive environment. Like, essentially, I live in Vancouver, and it's essentially a capital jungle. And when I mean a
mhm,
capital jungle, I just mean it is like hyper competitive place to live, and it's so competitive to the point where people might end up resorting to crime just to be able to afford a home here in Canada. Like
right.
the inflation has gone insane, but at the end of the day, it's like if I like in universe B, if decide to break bad and to own a gang and make money so I can afford a home one day for a family, which is absolutely ludicrous that our society has gotten to this point. Um, when we have so much goddamn land.
Mm,
Um, what was it? It would be so much easier to do that in this society than it would be in a society where I know my neighbors. It's so
mhm,
much easier to do this in a big city than it is a small community town. And I think like a part of us, we have a bunch of contradicting desires, the individual, the collective, etc. And I think what was it? I think communism, socialism. I think a lot of people do desire to be in a. I think a lot of people do desire to have some sort of community and some sort of healthy sense of belonging socially. At the end of the
mhm,
day, unfortunately, it is ideologies that fill this void. Like even the people listening to this video, something to ask yourself is: Do you have friends? Do you have, what support groups do you have outside of anything like super political?
mhm,
You know, even be skeptical and weary of us, like, because at the end of the day, like philosophy can't be it can't fill all the voids in your heart. It can't be your only culture. Um anyways, the warrior philosopher, what's your thoughts on that?
So you're right to a certain extent. I don't think that ideologies can fill that void. So, one of the biggest issues with modern, society, and the death of God, because when we talk about the death of God, we talk about a void that is left behind when religion is no longer a mainstay in a society. So there's this void that's left behind in terms of meaning. Someone with religious fervor who truly believes in God and truly believes that if they follow the doctrine of their faith, that they will be saved. If they truly believe that, they can go through a lot of hardships. Just look at, like, you mentioned the predatory nature of like radical Islam. Their faith can get an individual to strap a suicide bomb to themselves and blow up a government building or whatever. Like, faith is a very strong thing. And I don't think that ideology and the popular movements, like the social progressive movements of today, are anywhere near as effective at filling that void. You see, you have a metaphysical problem of meaning. The issue, and you have a lot of existentialist philosophers that discuss this. You have Albert Camus, who talks about the absurd nature that we are rational beings in an irrational world, that there is no inherent meaning to our lives, but we seek an inherent meaning because we can't fathom the fact that we're here for no reason. So When you have things like religion, well, that gives you a metaphysical reason for being alive. You are living a good and virtuous life to receive eternal salvation in the afterlife. And when you don't have that, and when you have the vast majority of society no longer subscribe to that, you have what you're discussing. You have all these people who find their meaning in popular movements, popular social movements. So, like, you wonder why there's so many different identities. And you could look at this in regards to people nowadays, and you say, well, why do people want to be victims nowadays? Well, that's like an identity, and that's one of the identities that's socially acceptable today. So of course they're going to latch on
It's
to that. So you have all the
it's an identity that is that bleeds empathy from the hearts of people.
right. So it makes them feel like, okay, well, if I'm in this, this specific role, that's good. I'm going to gravitate towards that. So, you know, you need something real and tangible to fill that void, right? And these things don't fill that void. But in regards to philosophy, I would actually disagree with the idea that philosophy can't fill that void. I think that if you have an individual
No,
who is
no, no. I think what I'm trying to say is that philosophy alone can't fill that void. And when I mean can't, what I really
Mhm.
mean is I think it's best not to.
I think for most people that's true. Um,
I think maybe it can for some, but I think
yes.
it is a more, if I was to like make it more perfectly articulate,
Mhm.
um a man a man without culture would not know what to do with philosophy simply because what would he have left without it?
Sure.
And that is a
Yeah.
terrifying idea. Imagine if all you had was an
Mhm.
idea. Could you give it up if it was wrong?
No, that's I mean that's a fair point to bring up, and it kind of goes back into like our discussion of perception and sight. This discussion of having that spiritual backing before you look for the information, right? Before you seek that knowledge, you seek that empirical data. But it's also important to recognize, like when I mentioned Nietzsche, Nietzsche's philosophy is not written for everyone. It is written for those individuals that can live off of very little meaning. You look at existentialist philosophy as well, and the issue is that most people are not equipped to deal with a life without God. Most people are just too stupid to. And it sounds bad, but it's true.
No,
All
it's
these
true. It's
individuals,
true.
yeah,
It's
the
sad. It's
vast majority of
sad.
individuals. It
It's
is
sad.
sad, but it's also like, well, I don't even say it's sad. It's just how it is. I can't call something sad if that's just a reality. Um, most people are not exceptional. Most people are born and they will never be exceptional. It
Well,
takes, you know,
oh, sorry. You go. You go. You go.
I was just gonna say, and it's not because of their natural abilities necessarily. A lot of times that influences it, right? But it's just about I mean, a lot of it comes down to luck. A lot like me and you, we are the people we are today because we were born in a specific set of circumstances that, whether they were bad experiences or good experiences, they set us on a path where we decided to think critically. We decided to seek more than our station. That's luck, with the luck of birth, but that's just life. Sometimes you're lucky to be born a lion, and sometimes you're unlucky enough to be born the gazelle who feeds the lion. That's just natural. There's social hierarchies are ingrained in the status of your birth. They're ingrained in luck, and they just happen. It's not inherently good or bad. And the problem is that most people can't live without things like religion, and you see that's happening today. That's why Nietzsche talks about the death of God as both a good and a bad thing. His philosophy is not meant for the average person. It's not meant for most people. It's meant for people who seek it, you know? And I think that idea that philosophy can't fill the void, yes, for most people it can't. But like, it takes a special person who can live a virtuous life without needing inherent metaphysical being, or sorry, without needing inherent metaphysical meaning. And in Camus' philosophy, he describes this as Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill. So for those of the people that don't know, Sisyphus was a Greek king who tricked Hades, the god of death, by getting him to entangle himself in his own chains and pushing Hades in a closet for a few days. And death stops, and people are being run over and coming back to life. People are having their heads chopped off and putting them back on. And of course, the gods figure this out, and they realize that Sisyphus has tricked Hades. So they they banish hate. You know, obviously they banish Sisyphus to the worst parts of the underworld, and his punishment is an eternity of pushing a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down when it hits the bottom. Now, you put most people in the position of Sisyphus, and they're just going to be despairing. This is horrible. You know, there's no way out. But Camus points out that we should see Sisyphus as happy. We should imagine him as happy. That even the strongest, even the, if even the strongest person, even in the worst situation, can find a way to be free in some way. Sisyphus still has his mental capacities. Sisyphus is still pushing that boulder up a hill. And like some select few individuals can go throughout life without any inherent meaning, without something metaphysical to fill that void and push forward anyway. Seneca talks about a man should want friends but not need friends. Like it makes your life richer when you have friends, but you shouldn't need them to move forward. You shouldn't need them to live. But like you said, most people can't live that way. Most people are not exceptional. Most people are ordinary, and most people go throughout their lives needing something more and finding it in the wrong places now that God is dead.
I think I was a lot like that when I was younger. Way more like that. I more needy, a lot weaker, felt like I needed something to give me meaning. But then again, I was pretty
Mm,
traumatized and pretty messed up when I was younger. Um
right.
I think like when I something I wanted to clarify is I'm not saying everyone should go to religion, nor am I
Mhm.
saying religion will always make society a better place, etc. Blah 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 blah. But I
Right.
think the point on which I'm trying to say here is a lot of people, um, a lot of people fail to see um a better society, and a lot of people fail to see improvements towards a society without it being indoctrinated to them. I
Mhm.
think a good place to start is like dating podcasts. Like I'm sure everyone here has like probably heard some ridiculous girl say something ridiculous that went viral. You know, something that is just so outlandish, and this person has such an unrealistic expectation. It blows the minds of the audience. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know, I totally get where you're going. I know what the
Like
kind of videos you're talking
I could
about.
basically just short and summarize it. Like there kind of is a stereotype of like perhaps maybe an atheist, spiritualist, and agnostic girl who is free spirited. Um, she thinks that she can essentially she thinks she can basically have as much promiscuous sex and find some sort of rich guy to essentially marry her, 6 feet tall, or just some ridiculous expectation. Someone who has lots of money, um, or maybe not even that. Maybe just really high standards, like it could be anything, status, etc. Or just having some sort of unrealistic expectation, or having this expectation that they're going to date the top 20, 30, 10, 5% of men,
I
and he's
value
gonna,
man.
yeah, high value man. Like as cringe as perhaps maybe as satirical as that word is for a man to say that, it's really more satirical when you hear a woman say
Woman
that.
say it.
Yeah,
Oh.
like back in before anyone had actually heard of like YouTube alpha males on
Mhm.
like Tinder dating profiles, I can't count how many girls said they wanted an alpha male in their bio. Like it was like every like 2 or 3 or like 20 profiles saying that she wants an alpha male. Um
Hilarious.
yeah, which nothing against them. Like they have their preference, right? I'm not even saying it's
Uh-huh.
wrong to prefer that.
Right.
But it's having this unrealistic expectation of perhaps maybe a puts in a better perspective, like being very promiscuous, sleeping around with a bunch of dudes, wanting a traditional, strong, masculine man without being a
Mhm.
very traditional, supportive woman, and then wondering why they fail at securing that man for a long term relationship.
Mhm.
Um, the internet is filled with guys dumping on women who say silly stuff nowadays.
Mhm.
And sadly, the dumping is somewhat justified to perhaps maybe get society or some people within society to realize that this expectation is kind of unfair and to some extent even shameful. But then again, a lot of the people who dump on these girls are shameful themselves. A lot of them
Right.
aren't very traditional men and they want a very traditional woman.
Yeah.
um, you know,
No, absolutely.
hookup culture, bro.
Well, I mean, like, it's like
You gotta get with like 1,000 girls, like 50 girls, 20 girls.
probably like
You
fresh and
got
fit type
yeah,
shit.
gotta sleep with this many women, make this much money for you to even consider having a relationship.
Right.
And then after you sleep with all of them, you have to lose a little respect for them. It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's obviously these people, all of them, the like it's okay to have like your preferences, right? It's okay to be a
Mhm.
girl and to not want to be a traditional woman and want a traditional man, but it's you know to but to actually like it's okay for a guy to like have all these things that he could ideally wish for, but it's another thing to like have that as an expectation. And I think the point in which I'm trying to say here is I'm not saying people society as a whole is always going to be better with religion, but I'm saying in some aspects, some people are better off being indoctrinated. Some people
Oh yeah.
are not capable of critical
Most
thinking.
people.
Yeah, yeah.
Most people.
Yeah, well, I mean there are some improvements, right? Obviously, like as we become more secular, there's less LGBT hate crimes. It's less racist. There are some improvements, right? But I'm just saying like beyond some of the very easy improvements, it's very difficult for the average Joe to even conceptualize the depth of problems in society, even fairly, before they even feel their own emotional biases. And this is how you get like your like honestly, like if I was like a fresh and fit, if I was like Myron Gaines, I would just essentially admit that I'm a disgusting human. I like for basically promoting hookup culture
Uh-huh.
and benefiting from it and then preferring like a traditional woman. Like I would just admit that I'm a terrible person. Like I find it comedic that these people think they're quote unquote what they're doing is good. It's
Mhm.
promoting the very culture they don't want ideally.
Right.
um so long as it benefits, actually not really. Well, kind of like you get what I'm saying. Like when it
Yes.
comes to women, they don't promote the culture, they shame it, but realistically for themselves, they like it as much as they can benefit from it.
I like
um
the male versions of your misandric feminists.
yeah, yeah, well, no, they're one and the same. They're
That's what I
two
mean,
set.
the
Yeah,
male
yeah, yeah,
versions of that, yeah.
yeah, yeah, I totally agree, sorry, that came off as rude and confrontational. Sorry.
You're good.
But I think like yeah, so like I think like when it comes down to it, once again, it's easy to look at tradition
Mhm.
and to see it as oppressive and irrational, which in some cases it may be. In some cases, you may have been doing something because your prophet who married a 9-year-old uh, was a crazy bastard,
Mashallah.
or the person who wrote him, or maybe just maybe someone sat down and somebody actually critically thought about what would be more stable for a society. Like whoever within Christianity figured out monogamy was a good thing, like hundreds of years ago before the study we have today.
Mhm.
Maybe he didn't have to be
Well,
very smart to notice it or to think about it, but
I
he may have been
I
quite smart to think about that.
you talking about the writer? Person who wrote those
Um,
things?
yeah,
Because I have a
I'm
fun
talking about
theory
the
for those
people. I'm
things if
talking
you
about
wanna
the
hear
people who
it.
promoted. I'm talking about the people who promoted it. The writer, whoever.
Yeah, no, I have a
Um,
theory for that
just
if you in a bit.
yeah, just once. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is like it's easy to look at something like monogamy, for example, and to see it as inherently a bad thing
Mhm.
when in reality the evidence is overwhelming. I'd say it's overwhelmingly strong it's good, and perhaps maybe a non-monogamous society in the future can be better, but I'd say
Mhm.
I highly doubt that with all the evidence, and I personally think it's more so just wishful thinking. Correlation is not always causation, but this is pretty there's a pretty high level of correlation here.
Oh, yeah.
But like when we're looking at something like and even if we look at real time in the first world with incel violence, both. Like if we talk about the subject of yeah, so if we talk about the subject of like tradition when it comes to something that is irrational, let's say something like perhaps maybe racism being taught in religion. Maybe well you could make the argument that it was more societies were more stable racially thousands of years ago, but like in the modern day, it's not very rational. We could say that
In the United States.
yeah, we could say obviously in most parts of the world. We could say that like I'd say generally most of the world, but like if we're talking about something like what was it homophobia,
Mhm.
like you could make the argument of like STD rates, blah blah, etc. etc. But in reality, a society where we put people in jail or persecute them based off their sexual orientation or gender that they had no control over, uh, that is not it's not really rational for anyone because anyone can be accused of being gay, and if you know people could easily be like it's a you know it's playing a
Here's an
very slippery
interesting.
slope with a thought crime, but it's
Here's a.
hold on. I think
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is like it's difficult to differentiate good tradition from bad tradition, and this
Mhm.
problem leads back to what the warrior philosopher was saying. The vast majority of individuals are not capable of being able to tell the difference. So in some sense, hate to say it, they're better just following the traditional culture that they've already been indoctrinated in. Now, to an extent, I agree. To an extent, I disagree. I'd say in some ways, our culture has improved a lot more becoming secular, but in a lot of ways, they fail to envision something better. So, what do you want to say?
I was going to say, just going off of even I think every single thing, even the irrational things that you just mentioned, you if you look into it. So you look into tradition, for example, where you take like homosexual relationships which existed throughout human history. I think, and I could be wrong here, but I feel that the difference fundamentally today in homosexual relationships with uh, compared to homosexual relationships in the past was throughout human history, even regardless of when you had societies that had homosexual relationships, there was still this idea of masculinity, and there was a hierarchy of masculinity among people um, that engage in homosexuality. So, for example, if you go back to Alexander's conquest of Persia. He was known for taking, the Persian emperors would castrate young boys and turn them into eunuchs, and then they would essentially be sex slaves afterwards. But there was almost a hierarchy within male homosexual acts. Same in Rome. Like I think there was something where like the gayest thing you could do was giving a woman head, which was more gay than giving a guy head. So I guess what I'm getting at is today I wonder if the negative reaction towards homosexuality is, when someone has like an inkling within them, when they're like prejudiced towards something specific, you have to delve into why are they prejudiced towards that thing. So is the prejudice towards homosexuality a prejudice with actual homosexual acts, or is it a prejudice with the effeminacy that is very prevalent among homosexuals?
Yeah, I think like I could go like I was giving a more short and like I kind of realized what I said didn't quite make
Mhm.
sense because I was being lazy. I was just trying to make it short because I rambled too much. But like realistically, if I wanted to expand on it, I'd say like prejudice towards homosexuality has a benefit if you want to try and have as high population growth as possible, and if you want to
Mhm.
try and discourage feminine behavior, particularly if you seek to create like a war-based society. If you want all
Right.
your men to be ready for war, then encouraging every biological male to be physically as strong as possible and every biological female um to essentially be at home is beneficial because you know 5 men can impregnate 100 women, you know, but men are the disposable sex. You know, only
Mhm.
one woman can be impregnated if there's 100 men.
Mhm.
So realistically, the continuation of your next generation really does depend on a first society how much women you have. So obviously, there's benefits to being uh homophobic, but once again, these benefits aren't necessarily rational in the modern day, and you could accuse anyone of being LGBT and try and ruin their status, or even if you make it illegal, you could even maybe try and frame somebody, um, which is perhaps maybe a bit more extreme, but like I think the point which I'm trying to get at here is
Mhm.
homosexuality, like hating homosexual people for just being homosexual. To
Mhm.
me, it is irrational.
Right.
Not everyone is going to want to be masculine. Not everyone is naturally masculine. And trying to force, this is just my personal perspective,
Sure.
but
Mhm.
I believe it is psychologically unhealthy. Whether we look at like what was it, gay conversion therapy, or whether we look at forcing men to be feminized, like I kind of went through that.
Mhm.
When you force someone to act outside of their natural expression of their gender, and I'm referring to
Mhm.
gender as the cultural expression of sexuality through biological roots. So, like when you force a or sexual orientation, like when you force somebody to be something further away from their own nature, I
Mhm.
think you're going to potentially have a more unstable individual. And I've lived through that.
Sure.
Cuz like I was like if I acted too masculine around my mother growing up who was quite feminist, she would beat me. And she
Mhm.
was very terrifying. Like and I mean very fucking terrifying. Like throw things at you, throw knives at you. Like, you
Mhm.
know, like the little kid that I once was like terrified for my life around her cuz like she was just a crazy bitch.
Mhm.
So when you have that growing up and you're being forced, you know, physically beaten into you,
Mhm.
uh, I was quite unstable. I was violently unstable. I could only imagine a gay man who doesn't want to be masculine, who's forced to be that way. I could only imagine how psychologically sadistic he might be towards others because of his own internal pain. So like that's kind of my perspective on it. Is I
Mhm.
don't think our prejudice towards homosexuals is really rational. I think the
Mhm.
only reason why you can make an argument, like there's other means which can be rationally in your own benefit, right? Just
Yeah.
like how it can be rationally benefit to be sexist, but I don't think it's rationally ideal for our society to be homophobic.
So I agree, but I guess what I'm getting at, and I don't think this is necessarily in contention to what you said. So all that is true. But let's say you take a society of like, and I like to say hypotheticals, and you like them, as we discussed in our first conversation off air. Let's say you have 10 people, right?
Hmm.
And of those 10 people, you have 5 men. Um, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong necessarily with, you know, let's say one of those 5 men is gay and he doesn't want to be masculine. He wants to be effeminate. But then if he's not contributing as much to the collective group, does he have the same right to the expression of power that the other 4 men have? And I would say no. I would say that there is a necessity for masculinity within a society, not only to promulgate, but to actually ensure the survival of the state. And I think that there's a certain level of respect that needs to be given to people who are contributing more to the power of the collective group. So that's kind of my view in regards to what you talked about. So yeah, it's a very cruel thing to make someone something they're not, and to do it in a way that's going to lead them to be unhappy and feel like they're in someone else's skin or whatever. But at the same time, if they're contributing less to the power of the collective group, and they should also receive less of the rewards. It's the same thing when it goes back to the egalitarianist argument and my views from a sort of Nietzschean perspective in the will to power. I think those who have more capabilities to strengthen the collective group and contribute to its power deserve to have more power within that collective group. So, I think that most homophobia is irrational. Most racism is irrational, but you also have to look at the undertones of these things. Why do they exist? And when you go to the root problem, you can find nuances even within those things. And I think it's important to not treat those as moral absolutes. So we talk about the moral absolutism of of egalitarian
Yeah,
society after the
I
Enlightenment.
wasn't engaging in that. Like, I could technically
Yeah, yeah,
say
yeah.
like it's rational to be racist. There's so many rational benefits.
Yeah, yeah,
But like
I don't want to put disservice to certain
yeah.
things.
So like in a hypothetical, right? So like if I was racist, and let's say I lived in Europe, during the
Mhm,
immigration crisis, there was a high crime wave from the arriving Islamic migrants, and a big part of this was
mhm,
due to the government's incompetent policies in the EU to allow for open borders, where literally an ISIS member could essentially claim asylum and terrorize the refugees who just
Mhm.
fled war. But also a part of it is the cultural differences and the fact that some Muslims they prefer the economic benefits of a secular society, but ideally they do not have the same values that generally create the type of wealth seen within more secular societies.
Mhm.
Um, and this is why you have countries like obviously it's pretty easy to see, like if I had to take a guess, I personally would take a guess that Dubai, one of its successes, might be because of the its more secular perspective for its economic productivity. But moving forward, um yeah, even with sexism, there's loads of benefits for in certain hypotheticals, but I would say overall for our society, rationally, I don't think it makes sense. Overall, rationally, I don't think racism makes sense. And I don't really see it as something morally I personally find virtuous or personally desirable. And when it
Mhm.
comes to it's just my own personal moral beliefs.
Mhm.
Um but when it comes to something like sexism, I could see how a man or woman might have some advantage in the dating market if they can manipulate the opposite sex through sexism.
Mhm.
But I don't necessarily see that as morally ideal. And when we're talking
Mhm.
about something like homophobia, like there's benefits you can have for a society through being homophobic. I don't see that as generally ideal. There's benefits from hating heterosexuals and masculinity. One of
Mhm.
the benefits could be to try and reduce violent masculine behaviors. You know, but the thing is promoting the hatred of men or the prejudice towards men. I don't necessarily see it as ideal. And one of the problems I
Mhm.
see with all these ideas is that they all of them tend to stir resentment from other different groups of people, as well as they tend to feed into other victim they also tend to feed into other victimized to other ideologies that prime individuals who receive some injustice to see themselves as victims. So, for
Mhm.
example, like the conservatives tend to appeal usually quite often to in North America to white men, and quite often
Mhm.
they'll try, and quite often some conservatives will even in the modern day some conservatives will claim that the only group that's oppressed is white men. Um, that's probably an example of victimization where there definitely is an argument to be made that white men are marginalized. Um, and even given less consideration just based off their ethnicity in
Mhm.
comparison to like hiring mandates. Yeah, so like
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said. It's just
Mhm.
I think the separation is between like what is generally good for the society in
Mhm.
comparison to like what is generally good for what is generally good for a society in what is beneficial under a particular circumstance that is most likely quite unpractical.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
even more so, like if I could just say, like actually having the level of empathy we have in our society, I would say
Mhm.
overall, there are probably more benefits than Actually, no, I would
Mhm.
say like there are plenty of benefits that I wouldn't.
Uh-huh.
There's plenty of benefits to the empathy within our society
Mhm.
that I do essentially find ideal, more or less, for
Mhm.
the maintenance of our society.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean,
But yeah,
overall, I'd have
empathy can be also destructive. I'd say it's probably
yeah,
slightly more.
I disagree, but I understand where you're
Slightly
coming
more.
from, but
I'd probably say it's slightly more beneficial.
Mm.
But well, keep in mind, like just because empathy is able to prey on us in different ways, if we didn't have
Mhm.
empathy, what was it, hatred, or even hatred or apathy could also just create a more unstable society in the opposite road. I would say
I think
empathy
empathy
has.
breeds hatred, though, today,
Hmm,
right?
but if we became apathetic at a certain
Mhm.
point, that could also just numb us to other issues going on.
Yeah.
So I mean, like I'd say overall, I'd say empathy is slightly. I'd say like it's beneficial. Um,
it's beneficial
It's
from a position of
beneficial in
strength. The pro
yeah, it's benefit like it's not even beneficial from a position of strength. Like even really weak people, it's better that they have some level of empathy for them for those around them than for them to violently lash out at everyone else around them.
That's not what I mean by position of strength. What I mean is you
Oh yeah,
see like today, if you look at like social progressivism, who are most of the proponents of social progressivism? They're like people like, they're like middle
I
class white people. I'm saying that the people are most involved in social issues are middle class white people, and there's this idea of you have you want to talk about you're talking about like the welfare state, right? And things that this is something that Thomas Sowell has also talked about before. It's this sort of dependence, this sort of like white savior mindset that comes from like the sort of modern progressive movement. Like Malcolm X was famous for sort of pointing out that the one thing he could say about like conservatives versus liberals is that these at least conservatives didn't pretend that they cared about like the black community. But you see that this phenomenon, it's like it's a racism of its own. I think like it's just sort of white guilt racism where you have these middle class or upper middle class white people who believe that they can save the minorities, that they can, through reparations and through social welfare programs, they can save the minorities. It's all going to be okay. And this empathy turns into hatred because it turns into self-hatred towards being white, for example. And what this turns into is you start off with this thing like racial justice, which is a good thing. But then it turns into, okay, well, you know, um, I see these people who are marginalized, these minorities who are marginalized, and I see myself and my neighbors are white and wealthy, and we're living well. And you have someone start to hate themselves for being white, or you have them start to hate the fact that they are in a better socioeconomic position. And
mm,
what this turns into is it turns into a hatred for exceptionalism, and this is exactly what Nietzsche predicts
I
within many of his books.
I think what I'm trying to say here is our
Mhm.
empathy within society,
Still empathy. Yeah.
even though it is a bad thing in a lot of ways and it has created a lot of bad
Mhm.
problems, I think it is kind of like religion, but
Yeah.
to a much greater degree more beneficial. I think it's except no, it's not. I can't compare it to the exact same as religion. It's not the same equivalency, but I think what I'm trying to say here is it's better than we have it than if we don't. And I'll give two
Yeah.
examples. I knew someone from Norway, and he told me a long time ago it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't necessarily criminalized once upon a time to kill people of a certain tribe in Norway.
Mhm.
Empathy,
Oh, like a
even for an
different like
empathy.
2 different Norwegian tribes is what you mean.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
base.
yeah.
No. I'm just kidding.
It's okay, it's okay. We all secretly celebrated it. Just joking, everyone, joking, joking. But yeah, basically yeah, basically like in a nutshell, like let's just say in a group of people, like a society that had vastly less empathy. Let's say a politician decided to essentially make it legal to kill illegal immigrants or something.
Mhm.
Um, sure, you could say maybe that might help decrease immigration, but it is, I would say, it is a type of undesirable suffering. I could talk about the psychological effects of killing. I could talk about just the fact that we're not as desensitized to brutalization as we were once upon a time. And to some extent, when I mean brutalization, I mean slaughter.
Oh, no. I
Um,
feel bad because I keep coming up with devil advocates
so
as
yeah, I think maybe like even though like generally I'd say I'd probably say I despise a lot of vegans
Uh,
ideologically. I would
yeah.
say I do see like a moral good from like a utility
Mhm.
standpoint
Yeah.
from a lot of their behavior. And even if I didn't care about animals, I would still
Mhm.
say it is beneficial for humans for the I think I've talked about with you in the environment, blah blah. Oceans create 80% of the world's oxygen
Mhm.
comes from phytoplanktons, which are fertilized from whales. Basically, it's just overall, it's better for the earth and for the for even humans.
Save the whales.
Economic efficiency. Well, it's really saving oxygen.
I'm
Um,
fucking around.
well, it's actually funny too, because like once again, the government gives
Uh,
a lot of money to animal agriculture. While at the same time,
mhm.
the left that tends to be proponents to try and fight climate change quite often will avoid the subject of animal agriculture because it's in
Mm.
their pockets. When
The
in
beauty of
reality,
ESG.
When in reality, the best thing that they could have done to fight climate change is to defund animal agriculture and just educate the populace on its damages. Because like when you,
Mhm,
because it's not even its pollution. Its pollution is nothing. When you look at like
mhm.
the oceans and I'm getting off topic. When you look at the oceans, is this appropriate for me to bring up, or is this not appropriate?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, when we look at the oceans, just the amount of oxygen, but also when we bring up the subject of reversing, like bringing back greenery and carbon sinks. So carbon fertilization is
Mhm,
where we take carbon into the atmosphere and it goes into the ground. I guess like this is also one of my problems when you brought up with the Ubermensch. Like, I'd say like a
mhm,
lot of left wing politics, like maybe sometimes even some of the better ones. I, I'm going to try to articulate this in the best way. Just like
mhm.
pretending to care about race and racial issues,
Yeah.
they are, uh, they are, um, they are worse than actors. No, they're
Mhm,
either amazing actors or they are what's the other word to uh they are ideologues that are blissfully ignorant, or they're just ready to consistently live in denial. Um as if their care is essentially wrapped together in mental gymnastics to the point you can essentially say it's basically it's almost as if they don't care. Basically what I'm trying to say here is when it comes to politics, a lot of them they've never cared about the environment. Like, I've talked with one socialist who said he cared about the environment. Asked him if he was plant based. He said yes. And I had a conversation with him. And the point I made is like I've talked with other environmentalists who try to get me to shut up, and I essentially politely talk to them. And I think like one of the things that frustrates me is it's if you don't care about the environment, that's okay. Just just
mhm.
just don't tell me some
Admit it,
bullshit.
yeah.
Yeah, just admit it, and I'll be cool with you.
Mhm,
My
yeah.
problem is when people say they care when they don't care. That's where I feel like that's where I feel like the culture of disingenuousness creates a
Mhm,
culture of neglect for problems. The less neglect we have for problems, the better. But I think the Ubermensch disguises himself in the form of the. Sorry, I think the masses believe they see an Ubermensch within politicians and within
uh-huh,
people who rise up or
right.
voices, politicians, media influencers. When in reality they see an actor.
Mhm,
The person never really overcame slave morality, or they never really tried to become a select few individuals capable of envisioning a better tomorrow without slave morality. They
mhm,
merely seek to market themselves as greater than what they are to people who, even if they're intellectually intelligent, have essentially
mhm.
emotionally been reduced to cogs in a machine
Oh, yeah.
and manipulated masses. In other words, even really highly intelligent people have been
Mhm,
conditioned from a young age to not think critically or to really
absolutely.
understand how to interpret empirical evidence or basic
Mhm,
philosophical concepts such as fallacies, so they can actually recognize uh, mistakes in reasoning to
mhm.
help them come to better arguments as well as to help better understand data. So
You know
like yeah, so basically I think that's one of the examples, and I think there was another example I wanted to bring up.
mhm.
Environment. Oh yeah, I think I said was it race too? Maybe I'll remember it. But you wanted to say something?
I was gonna say, if you're not willing to pull a Ted Kaczynski, you don't give a fuck about the environment.
Who's Ted Kaczynski?
Ted Kaczynski.
Who's that guy?
Unabomber.
Ooh, yikes. Yeah, not gonna bomb nothing today. But
I'm kidding.
yeah, no worries. I think like the overwhelming problem I have when yeah, I think like what was it? I think overall I would just say empathy, even though
Uh-huh.
as perhaps maybe flawed as it is, and as perhaps maybe as toxic and destructive, and
Mhm,
when manipulated by the right people, can even be the downfall of a society. I would say
mhm,
overall, it is actually more of a. I'd say it has a benefit to society that uh when managed, is can do more good than harm for the long run of our society. But I think, like you said, I think like the Ubermensch or somebody who embodies master morality has
Yeah.
to um that person has to try and guide people to what empathy truly means. And I think
Uh,
that's kind of a
I
or
mean,
maybe no
I
no
wouldn't
what
use the word
not
empathy.
empathy
I'd use the word morality.
no healthy applications for empathy.
Oh
Like an
well, yeah, healthy
Ubermensch.
application for anything. Yeah.
Yeah, Ubermensches are would probably be able like an Ubermensch would be able to, or somebody who's more of a critical thinker. But
Mhm. I still stand by my critique of empathy in society. I understand your point of view, but like even earlier, I was thinking when you're talking about like at least empathy might desensitize people. I think we're too might desensitize people from like violence or whatever. I think we're too sensitized to violence. I think people, if we went to war tomorrow, how many people do you think would be able to do a good job fighting off a Chinese invasion of Taiwan or whatever, right? Like we go back to we're talking about effeminacy in men. In China, it's illegal to portray men as effeminate in their media. Like they're gearing up for war, and maybe not all their people are happy, but they're in a position, potentially to defeat us. When 50 years ago, they had like a GDP per capita of like $100 per household, right? And now they're gearing up to um, to meet us as a peer adversary. Like, are we ready? I think
so my counter to that would be if I had
yeah.
to take a guess from China Uncensored, their army
Mhm.
is nowhere near as in shape or really
No,
ready.
not true.
Like
Not that's if that's what you're being told in the like I'm involved I
wait,
can't
oh wait,
talk
do
too
you
much.
actually or how so like are you actually really educated on the subject or
Yes. I am a Chinese linguist. That is my job.
okay, well, I mean like I might take your word on it more so. Have you heard the
Yeah.
claims that like the Chinese military is struggling to meet its fitness mandates?
That those things could be true, but technologically they are
Oh, okay, yeah. I think I'm just saying like physical fitness, right? Like
they also have 2 million soldiers, so their physical fitness on average isn't going to be as good as ours because we're pulling from a more selective pool. Theirs is,
yeah.
their recruitment process is a lot different,
How many soldiers do they have in their military?
I believe it's 2 million.
Total in their military.
Reserves included? I thought it was
Yeah.
2 million. Let me see. Chinese military personnel.
Yeah, so
I'll
I
double
think
check.
like another good example is let's say
2.5
if
million total.
yeah, let's say if like you were a part of a world, like anywhere in the world right
Mhm.
now, where
Yeah.
where your family was being genocided,
Mhm.
you might wish that people had more empathy in that
Yeah, it's
particular
all
situation.
contextual. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, when given the context of different possibilities, I
Mhm.
would say reducing harm to sentient beings is ideally good. It's just like we've talked about before, beings need to pursue harm, like, particularly humans need to pursue harm enough to desensitize themselves to said harm. It's kind of like a
Mhm.
dog that has anxiety or fear of people.
Yeah.
Desensitizing that dog to that fear of people is better than coddling that dog's fear. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
a lot of humans have been coddled. They haven't really been
Mhm.
desensitized to the real world, and because of that lack of desensitization, it makes it more difficult for those people to actually cognitively think about what's being said because that emotion is overriding their ability to rationally think.
Mhm.
But I guess the point of which I'm saying is like let's just say empathy is overall doing more damage to our society. I'm still saying that
Mhm.
overall, even if it does more damage right now,
Mhm.
I'd say we might be in a better position right now if we didn't have empathy. I think that's maybe a better articulation.
Mhm.
So, and a
I mean,
good
I respect that opinion. I just don't know if I agree. You know.
mm, I mean, like, I think we might say this from a position of privilege where we're not as persecuted as some people in the world. Like, that's
Of
kind of like
course.
my counter argument to that.
Then again, that's master and slave morality. Like, oh, if you're in a position of being persecuted, you're gonna have that hatred for that thing, right? Because you're in a position of weakness. You know what I mean? That kind of factors into it as well.
I mean,
Yeah.
you could call it master morality or slave morality, but realistically, wishing people had more empathy. I don't
Mhm.
think that inherently means that you would adopt a slave morality. You might just
No, I'm
wish
not.
people.
Yeah, I'm saying that having empathy because you're in a position of weakness is slave morality. You should have empathy just because it's good, not because like, oh, I wish somebody had more empathy when they beat me up. It should be, you know, I have empathy because, that's the value first. It's not a reaction. Like I think when I said that's slave morality, it's you were kind of talking about somebody who is in a country where their family got genocided. They believe in empathy because their family got genocided. So that's why I would call that slave morality. It's like a
Mm,
reaction to a hostile external stimuli. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying that's
yeah,
just the case.
but then is slave morality bad in all contexts then?
No, because even in Nietzsche's philosophy, he doesn't necessarily advocate for that slave morality is necessarily bad. It's just that we have too much slave morality
Yeah.
uh,
Um,
within like the time frame that he's talking about, and then growing coming forward.
yeah, I think just my argument more or less I think you more or less get where my argument's coming from.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not saying it's a bad argument. I just disagree from my because I'm coming from a position where I believe that we are too far into a society of weakness and decadence,
Yeah,
and that we need to be more involved in we need to be a little bit more amoral
conscient
when it comes to our
we need to be more
so
conscientious and less empathetic and agreeable. I agree. I agree.
mhm.
I'm just saying if we didn't have that empathy at all. I'm not saying we don't have
Yeah,
too
that could be
much.
true. Yeah, I don't know. I have to think
Um
about like the long term ramifications of
yeah,
that, which is I think what you're talking about. I'm not sure.
I think it's I'm applying my same reasoning to religion as I am to empathy. It's trying to look at all the benefits that something can give you rather than
Hmm.
just looking at the negatives. Because the
Hmm.
negatives are a large list. But would we be better
Yeah.
off without it is the question. In
Hmm.
religion, in some ways, yes, no. In empathy, in some ways, yes and
Right.
no. But in some ways, like if let's say we fast forward society 500 years from now, let's say we
Mhm.
actually see like very high rates like we end up in a very not like extremely let's say like we end up in a society that is very reminiscent of the UBC study. High rates of
Mhm.
economic disparity, certain men disproportionately monopolizing women, and then you have a portion of men that have
Mhm.
few options committing violent sexual crime, criminal behavior. You see essentially like let's just say we fast forward, right?
It's the
You,
world that the incels think is exist right now.
well, the unfortunate reality is like after seeing that study, I kind of because UBC put out a newsletter where
Mhm.
UBC, University of British Columbia, where I live,
Yeah.
essentially endorsed the findings in the study. And I just read through the abstract. I'm like, wow, fuck, this is peer review. Like, every time I heard the incels say, oh, society's collapsing, we can't get any girls, I didn't really take it that seriously. But when I read through the
Uh-huh.
study, it, I guess you could say I feared like Jesus in Christ, man. If I had a kid in this society, like, is it gonna get worse in like 30 years from now? Are they gonna be safe? Like, if I had a kid like 5 years from now, like Jesus. But anyways, the point at which I'm trying to say here is like, if we take out monogamy, and
Mhm.
now imagine if we could actually let's say we could actually press a button, and we could see if like let's say monogamy was much more popularized, even in because it is relatively popularized, but like let's just be real here,
Still
like
is, yeah.
yeah, but like if you go to a large major metropolitan city,
Yep.
like there's a lot of people who, let's be real here, there's a lot of girls who are dating the same guy, but let's also be real here, there's also a lot of people who are openly dating, so yeah,
Do
in
you think
some ways
that's
it's
do you think
more,
that's
some ways
true though,
less.
like statistically, or do you think that we just know about those instances? Because like what I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not. I've seen statistics that have shown that we've actually become less sexually promiscuous over time. We're just more open about it. So like people were having sex at a younger age, like 50, 100 years ago. People were having more sex, but it was socially stigmatized. So people weren't really open about it. I don't know if that's true or not. This is
I
just one
mean,
thing I've heard.
I could my simple counter to that could be that could simply be the case because most people are not sexually active. It could be because
Ah, like the
most men don't have as much sexual access to what they desire,
that could
and
be.
that
Yeah, yeah, no, that could definitely be it.
most women don't have access to the type of relationships that they might find desirable. Like
Mhm.
a girl like There's plenty of girls out there where if they wanted to, they could, like, this idea that they, all the girls go for Chad. It's like it's like a
I've
lot
seen
of
girls with some ugly dudes. That's all I'll say.
what I'm trying to say is, like, most girls are aware, like a lot of girls are aware of the type of relationship they want. And, obviously some are
Mhm,
gonna go for looks. Guys do that too. Not even shaming.
mhm.
I don't care. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is like if we could press a button, and if, let's say, like, the incel problem didn't exist today, if we could see a
Yeah.
monogamous society, it might give us a different perspective of our society. Now, let's say we had another
Mhm.
up. So this is like using tradition as like an aspect of our culture that
Mhm.
perhaps is better than not. Now we're gonna look at empathy. Let's say we could push a button and we could see what our society would look like without empathy. And let's say, we could push that button again and we could see what it looks like with empathy. As bad as things are right now, it could be worse without empathy.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
that's more or less,
definitely.
and I
Could
think
be.
it's a useful tool for a lot of its societal improvements. Unfortunately, I would say a lot of our problems are coming from empathy as well. That's why I
Mhm.
hesitated when I said empathy is overall a good thing. No, there's a lot of bad. Like, I can say
Yeah.
that around a bunch of lefties, because, like, then I'd have to make a bunch of arguments that they don't want to hear.
Uh-huh.
Um, but to really fully expand on my ideas, I think that's
Yeah.
maybe a better articulation of what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Um, I mean, it's easy to look at society for what it is now without appreciating the benefits that it has. Like, even in a society where, let's say, a lot of men are, a lot of incels, a lot of men are not, they're not getting any. One of the benefits to
Mhm.
that is, I hate to say it, it weeds out the gene pool. Uh,
Oh, yeah. I
um,
mean, that's how I mean, if you go back, in some ways, it's very reminiscent of, okay, this is gonna be like, I don't necessarily believe this. I was gonna meme a little
I
bit,
mean,
but, the
I just wanted to say, like, I do value utility. I don't think it's inherently a good thing that a bunch of people are miserable. Just saying, but
wait,
Morbius, you want to
can you
talk?
repeat that? You cut out for a second.
Oh, I value utility. I just don't
Mhm.
want. I don't think it's good that a bunch of people are suffering.
Yeah.
I just
Mhm.
see some benefits from it. So you want me to
Yeah.
go?
No, I was gonna make a I was gonna meme a little bit. I was gonna like, well, if you're coming from the red pill perspective, they're gonna tell you, well, in the hunter gatherer society, one dude got all the chicks and everyone else just had to work. Um, but no, that's actually funny. You mentioned sort of happiness that exists in monogamous countries. Well, that's like a very Christian concept, right? The idea of one wife. Even the peasantry are married, right? So like there's because in some cultures, in some religions where you still have polygamy in regards to like wives, like you still have a lot of polygamous countries, Samoan countries, or like those Pacific islands, like Tongan country or Tonga, American Samoa, a lot of Islamic countries, and it makes me think, like you're kind of mentioning today, with the UBC study, and the potential ramifications of, well, maybe what they're saying does have some merit to it. Maybe these individuals, without without this sort of culture of people growing up, having access to a decent job, being able to get married without too much difficulty, having the sort of nuclear family, maybe there is some merit to that, and that nowadays there's just there's less access to that lifestyle, and you see the social instability that comes from it. And it's definitely true in regards to employment. Like if you go back 50 years, you could get your average blue collar job, and like they say, you can afford a house, you can afford to have a stay at home wife. She didn't have to work too, whereas nowadays it's very difficult to have one member of the household working. Like nowadays, it's like a necessity for both the man and the woman to work, whether they want to or not. So there's definitely some merit to those arguments that are being brought out, and I think the fact that a lot of, no offense to the incels, but a lot of the incels that bring these arguments up, you can't, it's hard to take them seriously, because you're like, well, you're making that argument because you can't get laid. Of course you're going to believe that. But then you look at it, you talk about your UBC study, well, maybe there is some merit to what they're talking about. It's just so hard to take them seriously.
I
It
mean,
sounds like some guy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like when when you actually talk to some of the feminists who are
Mhm.
like man haters.
Yeah.
Some of them have been sexually abused.
Right.
And it's hard to take them seriously until you hear their story. Then you
Mhm.
kind of realize that this person went through something really harsh. Um, when let's just say in a like when you have a lot of people who maybe go through something like that, it can create some level of instability. I
Mhm.
think it's easier to look at. I think it's easier to look at the it's easier to look at people's reactions rather than the data.
Mhm.
You know, um,
Yeah.
and like for example, like what was it? I think you've probably seen the recent like have you seen like the recent whatever clip that went viral, the one where the guy the whatever podcast is getting canceled, where the guys were like they were saying like spousal abuse is so rare.
If there's someone that's very, very young and goes into a marriage and has kids when they're like 18, 19, 20, a year into the relationship, it gets really, really abusive. Even though it might be rare from what you guys think.
It is. Go on.
If it would happen, what would you recommend for those people? Would they divorce or do you want them to keep going in the relationship?
Keep going.
You can't divorce, and that's not a real thing.
Even though it might be like physically abusive?
Because you got to endure. People are too.
You want to stick into the
wanna
relationship?
People are
physical
just.
abuse. I mean, look,
people
I'm gonna be
nowadays
honest.
are just.
For anyone
Situation.
that might be in that situation, what would you recommend?
Okay,
Do you
here's-
think
Endure.
that-
I'll tell
would
you
they
what.
give up
I'll tell you what.
Endure.
It is such an extreme example that I can't give a prescription for what other people should do.
What about if two people get married,
Sorry,
they have a kid, and then the wife starts cheating? Do you think they should divorce?
Absolutely. Jesus himself said in cases of adultery, divorce is
So you think that
permissible.
divorce is worse than physical abuse?
For the
Or
children.
cheating, sorry. You think that
Cheating is
cheating is
worse
worse
than
than
physical
physical
abuse.
abuse?
For the
Sorry.
children, yes.
Absolutely
I think I'm not
Okay,
going to
no,
say this
divorce-
is worse.
divorce
I mean,
is worse
I,
for the
I
children.
already-
I've turned people in my community from zeros to six-figure heroes in less than 18 months. Wait until you guys get into the crypto course that Charlie's doing and I'm helping him out with. You're going to see. You're going to see everything. Like I said, look, what do you think? And they want him to acknowledge, he wants those guys to acknowledge him. But they're too smart. They want to engage with him. Look, I know that I'm the only one in Rule Zero actually dealing with these guys, but
Another lie. Rollo Tomasi leaves a comment. Yep, Hogwood's handler left a comment and was too cowardly to let the comment stand. But we screenshot it, so here it is, with solo titties, of course, right underneath him, as he usually is. Then, listen to John try to explain away why he takes pictures of other people's children. And even worse, even more creepy, he says it's a video. The truth, we're talking about this guy basically with his thing, taking pictures of fucking kids from behind, which, like you said, anybody here would be walking with their niece or a relative and say, wait a minute, they turn around and say, yo, what the fuck are you doing taking pictures of me and my niece, man? What the?
yeah, that's not a picture, that's a video.
And then, this one's even more creepy, you know?
Okay, this is when I was at Disney and there was fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
This doesn't look like Disney. And he also makes a comment of claiming this kid to be his, like this child belongs to him. That's creepy.
okay, this is when I was at Disney and there was fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
This doesn't look like Disney either. Sneakily taking pictures of children again.
okay, this is when I was at Disney and there was fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
This doesn't look like Disney either. Taking pics in the classroom. Notice how nervous he is when he says, oh, this was Disney, when it just wasn't Disney.
okay, this is when I was at Disney and there was fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
This child actually looks like she was trying to leave the classroom to get away from this monster, Jonathan Wendell Hogwood, who shouldn't be around children.
fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
And now he takes pictures during recess. He just can't get enough of taking pictures of other people's children.
fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
And the pictures at recess are from a distance, hiding, lurking in the shadows.
fucking adorable kids everywhere. Okay, it was just
Hiding, lurking in the shadows.
fucking adorable kids everywhere.
If there's someone that's very, very young and goes into a marriage and has kids when they're like 18, 19, 20, a year into the relationship, it gets really, really abusive. Even though it might be rare from what you guys think.
It is. Go on.
If it would happen, what would you recommend for those people? Would they divorce, or do you want them to keep going in the relationship?
Keep going.
You can't divorce, and that's not a real thing.
Even though it might be like physically abusive?
You got to endure. People are too.
You want to stick into the
People
relationship?
are just.
I mean, look,
people
I'm gonna be
nowadays
honest.
are just.
For anyone
Situation.
that might be in that situation, what would you recommend?
Okay,
Endure.
here's- I'll tell
Would
you
they
what.
give up
I'll tell you what.
divorce?
It is such an extreme example that I can't give a prescription for what other people should do.
What about if two people get married, they have a kid, and then the wife starts cheating? Do you think they should divorce?
Absolutely. Jesus himself said in cases of adultery, divorce is
So you think that
permissible.
divorce is worse than physical abuse?
For the
Or
children?
cheating, sorry. You think
Cheating
that
is
cheating is
worse
worse
than
than physical abuse?
For the
Sorry.
children, yes.
Absolutely
I think I'm not going to say this is
divorce-
worse.
divorce
I
is
mean,
worse for the children.
Which
So-
one? Do you know which one it was? Which podcast?
It was the one where the creep, modern life dating. The guy,
What was the name of the podcast?
the whatever podcast, the dating podcast.
Oh, I did jujitsu against a guy who has been on that podcast before.
Ooh,
That's
you-
funny. I beat him. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, right, where
Yeah.
modern life dating, that creep who likes to take pictures of people's children, and apparently, according to Abba Preach, he admitted to assaulting a woman.
Jeez.
Yeah, and apparently, yeah. So that little creep over there,
Just looked him up.
yeah, that creep over there, what was it? Him and a lot of people were saying, because like Destiny's wife Melania was saying, like, do you think people should divorce if the woman's getting beaten? And one of them was like, well, no, endure. And I think one of them said, it's such a
I
rare-
know what you're talking about now. Yeah.
it's such a rare circumstance that ever happens. I mean, like,
I just got people sending me everything. What did you say?
I punched a Latina bitch in.
You do?
Yeah.
Some motherfuckers must really hate you. Because after the last video, I just got people sending me everything. What did you say?
I punched a Latina bitch in the face at Rakon. What's Rakon?
It's a club in Japan. He lives over there. He was talking shit to some guy. I guess people just linking the group chats. He was talking shit to some guy, and the guy said to him, well, at least I've never been arrested for glassing a bitch. And he's like, yo, why are you so sensitive? Are you going to leave next? So that's the MLD saying, like, why are you so sensitive? Why are you bringing that up? And the guy says, I'm not sensitive, just giving back some. And then MLD says, you act like that's the last bitch I'll smite on this planet.
Well, do you think you have healthy habits?
Yeah.
I think it's very bizarre that someone accuses or says that you bottled a woman in the face, and your response is, that didn't happen. Your response is, are you being sensitive right now? Why are you bringing this up? Then it makes me really think you did do that shit. Also, how would you kill this for being so disgusting? Personally, I think a good old-fashioned bludgeoning is the way to go. Big old monkey wrench to the head. And then he posts her picture in the group chat.
I don't want a traumatized woman in my life.
Time to beat Aya. I'm gonna beat Aya for not being pretty enough. I have to beat Aya for letting this happen.
And I want to deal with a normal, mentally stable, healthy woman.
I will glass a bitch with a champagne bottle for the honor of the group. If this happens, I'll have so much fucking money. I'm gonna glass like 17 bitches.
Okay, I know which video
yeah,
you're talking
10
about.
to like I remember like looking at David Buss. I can't remember the exact statistics I put on the screen, but looking at his paper on sexual conflict theory, which I'm not going into, I found some stats that he referenced in his paper. I think it ranged between like 8 to 30%, depending if you're going cross culturally, for spousal rape.
Oh, geez, that's pretty high.
Yeah, and it's I think what I'm trying to say here is like it's easy to look at, let's just say in like a hypothetical, a lot, if we lived in a society where that was maybe more common, and let's say the next generation of women became more hateful towards men, it might be easy to look at the behavior of the women and not the problem. It might be easier to look at the behavior of incels, not the problem. But yeah, it's I think ultimately though, I mean, like, I think most of them, if they were given the opportunity to, they wouldn't be monogamous. Well, maybe not most of them, but I think a lot of them wouldn't be. If they've never had the experience of being an incel. But like when it comes to subject, right?
Mhm.
Of what was it? I'm curious. Would you like to move on to another subject for a bit?
I'm cool, whatever. Like, dude, I'm I'm vibing. We can talk about whatever.
Sure. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is talk about a little bit politics. Like, I guess more or less, do you mind just explaining to me like why is before we finish politics, why is
Mhm.
liberalism like why do you see it as a form of slave morality? Because like I think like egalitarianism might have some level of slave morality in it, but
Mhm.
because recently I've come to the position that I am indifferent to egalitarianism. I think it's good in some
Mhm.
aspects. I think in some aspects people don't desire it, and I think inequalities are inherently a bad thing. But more or less, like, what is your perspective on slave morality and liberalism or classical liberalism? Because in a competing market of people, how do you
Mhm.
see it as slave morality?
So I see it as slave morality because, first of all, within like a liberal, like let's take the liberal capitalist democracy, which is sort of the embodiment of what a liberal system is supposed to look like, right? So I feel
Mm-hmm.
like when you have, I think that liberal systems aren't inherently bad if the culture organically is able to maintain social cohesiveness with Here, let me rephrase that. I think that, for example, if you look at the early American state, right? The 13 colonies. I think that liberalism worked there, first of all, because you didn't really have a lot of division of classes. See, the first Puritans that came over, most of them were literate, most of them were relatively intelligent. So when you have a lot of the early Revolutionary War pamphlets like Common Sense by Thomas Paine, people were reading this. There was this big think tank of people who were inspired by the Enlightenment, who were well read, and who were intelligent, and who were willing to engage in the political process. And this happened organically. So liberalism thrived in the early American state because people were bought in and people weren't coming from vastly different classes of society. Now, obviously, you still had a major slave population within the American state, but I'm not going to consider them. They didn't have the same rights as the regular American citizens, so I'm not going to include them when I say the early American state was more educated. They are more involved in the political realm, and that's why it worked. But the problem with liberalism, especially today, is that because liberalism advocates for equal representation of power within a democracy, what ends up happening, and this is what you're seeing happening in the American democracy, is
So,
that oops, what's up?
so the problem is the goal for so the problem is I think what it is like yeah I should have let you finish. I'm sorry. That was rude.
You can cut it, or you
All
want me
right,
to
so yeah, I think it to
let me
me it
elaborate,
sounds
or
like the value of equality and how that expands into equality of outcome, or how that can
mm,
easily expand into equality of outcome with in a society that is perhaps maybe more empathetic, or a society that's gone more soft, or however you want to say it, a society with less survival pressures. That
I mean that's
is more or less a undesirable thing.
that's part of it, but just expanding upon this, what I really am getting into is that, so within a liberal capitalist democracy, first you have the early Puritans in the Americas. They were English, they were Protestant. That was the identity. Now you have an influx of different peoples coming in. You have the Irish Catholics, you have the Germans, you have the French, you have the Italians, and then eventually you have non-Europeans as well. Once this happens and you have all this division of different classes, sometimes heavily influenced by what culture they come from. You want me to pause really quick?
One sec. Sorry about that.
You're good. Anyway, so once you shit, what was the last thing I said? So once you have all this influx of different peoples, you have more divisions in class, and what happens is you go from like 10,000 people who think relatively the same way, who come from relatively the same background, and now you have tons of different peoples from tons of different backgrounds, and you have so many different classes. You have a growing middle class, you have a pretty large working class. What happens is once you have economic social hierarchies that develop, you have people with the most money having the most power. You have elections, and obviously those with money can afford more. They have more. They have
They
more
have more
finances.
votes. They have more votes.
Exactly. Well, because they can buy the votes essentially. This is what happened in the early Roman Republic, and why you see the propping up of Caesar as dictator. See, the same thing's happening. So in the early Roman Republic, you have senators literally buying votes, literally. Now it's a little bit less outright in our current society, but essentially having the finances to buy campaign ads and having the finances to prop up specific political figures basically allows those with money to have the reins of power. The economic elite becomes the political elite. So when you have a democratic system where everyone's vote is the same, and you have an individual who's very wealthy, they can buy the votes of those, like, no offense, dumb people, and have them support policies which end up benefiting the interests of the economic elite. So it's no longer the intellectuals necessarily, and sometimes the intellectuals happen to also be in the economic elite, but it's no longer pure capability that drives a country towards a specific uh, end. It is the economic elite that is driving the country towards an economic end. And this is the big issue of liberalism. What happens is you have man reduced to being an economic cog, an economic machine. Their identity is no longer defined by some sort of spiritual or metaphysical expression. It's all based on, like, what's the first thing people ask? It's, what do you do for a living? Right? Their identity is both their economic contribution and their economic consumption. Instead of creating art, it's all about, you express yourself by how you consume. It's like, okay, well, what are you wearing? Oh, I got Gucci on, I got this on, I got that on. That's how you express yourself. And art is the same way. Art becomes about consumption. It's no longer about creating these great revolutionary things. You look at all these artists that go mainstream and they start changing their music to appeal to a wider audience. Everything's about consumption. Even innovation a lot of times has become about consumption. Social media, you compare, like, social media to, like, what Elon Musk is doing. Elon Musk is building, like spaceships and revolutionizing technology. And that's good because you still have that within a free market system, but you also have, the big companies being factored around purely consumption, purely things that make life more comfortable, or provide entertainment. That's a big part of the economy. And so you have all these you think of the soul, for example. The soul is crushed in a liberal society because you have individuals reduced to being defined by economics. In a society where not everyone has a inherent like equal amount of vote, they have to work towards having power in their society. If you have a dictatorship or a monarchy or whatever, people have to work to attain a position of prominence or influence in their government. They know they're not going to be given it. It's like Mao Zedong says, war is politics without, or sorry, politics is war without bloodshed, and war is politics with bloodshed. And in the liberal tradition, with people having equal representation and power, it gives them this false sense that they actually have a say. What really happens, especially in a representative democracy, is, you feel like you've done your civic obligation. Oh, I voted for someone, but you voted someone to represent you, and they're probably not going to represent you the way you really want them to represent you. They're going to do what their financial constituents tell them to do. They're going to do what the guy who funded their campaign tells them to do. So you have a fake democracy, and I think this is an inevitability of large scale liberal countries. I think that liberalism can work on a small scale the same way that communism can work on a small scale, because you have, like you said, you have this sort of neighbor dynamic. It's a lot harder to cheat your neighbor than it is to cheat someone you don't know.
To actually, I like to I would contest, like, some of the problems you're talking about really also stem from monopolization.
Yeah,
So
but that's an aspect of the free market.
Well, not necessarily, kind of. Like, you can have a liberal society with anti-monopoly laws. Like, certain countries, certain companies are not allowed to own a monopoly.
Right.
So basically, in that circumstance, but no, I see what you're saying. I understand your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's like, like you said, there's like, just to name one, like, you take why is medicine so expensive? Well, the free market liberal guy will say, oh, well, it's because we have patent laws. If we don't have patents, then I can make the same medicine for much cheaper, and that's going to lower the price. So obviously, there's solutions to my problem that can be solved within liberalism. I'm not, pretending that liberalism is a completely failed system, but I think that it inevitably, especially in large societies, I think it inevitably devolves into something that isn't good, and I think that ultimately liberalism can't solve its own problems, and that's why I have a big, I'm a big critique of liberalism, not just classical liberalism, and even more so neoliberalism. At least classical liberalism, I can get behind a little more, even though I still don't like it.
I mean, I think we're kind of like we're kind of getting closer to the end of this interview. Obviously,
Yeah,
I
definitely.
I definitely have a bit more
A little
time
late.
to interview you, and I just ordered Skip, so I have quite a bit more time till my order gets here, till I shove some food down as quickly as humanly
For sure.
possible. But I think the next thing I want to get to here is like,
Yeah.
what was it? It's the subject of what was it? The next thing I want to get to really quick here is maybe
Yeah.
your what was it? Like I kind of got that down a little bit. I guess I just want to
Mhm.
say like the only issue I particularly have with that is
Mhm.
what was it? No different than, let's say, um like I'm not convinced it's necessarily complete. Like I see the similarities of a slave morality system where you
Mhm.
have a king that you sort of devote yourself as subservient to. But I don't necessarily see a economically liberal country
Mhm.
in the same light as, let's say, slave morality. Maybe you can change that a little bit, but I guess one of my big contentions, I'm getting tired here, would really just come down to the fact of it's not necessarily a worship of the economic elite. Um, and to some extent, you could even simply make the argument the economic elite actually sometimes are in favor of policies that would create more productivity than sometimes what the masses want. Like sometimes what the masses want might be catastrophic for the results of the nation.
Mhm.
Just an example, right? Like, what's
Yeah.
your thoughts on that? Because
So I think you're misunderstanding where like I'm identifying the slave morality. So like all that's true, right? But where I'm identifying the aspect of slave morality. So like first of all, would you consider like we agree that Christianity is an example of slave morality?
yes.
I would say that in many ways, liberalism is just Christianity repackaged. It's essential.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily about the hierarchies that make it slave morality. It's essentially it's the same values of Christianity that have been transferred over to liberalism. It's like when I talked to you about Marxism. Marxism, but Marx wants to call religion the opiate of the masses. Well, you wouldn't have Marxism without Christianity, because I think the only difference really is that the idea of so even within Christianity, the masters still had a place um, within society where the religion was one rooted in slave morality. They were able to repackage the social hierarchies that you have in pagan systems, and they were able to maintain that in the Christians in Christendom, right? Essentially, the priestly classes and the warrior classes, became the knights and the bishops and the papacy. So they were able to find a way to circumvent that, right? Because the idea that a god has been chosen as the divine ruler of given this god-given right to rule, that's not really Christian. That's not really an aspect of Christianity. That's the master finding a way to subvert slave morality to their own benefit. Indulgences, where someone's paying to have their sins forgiven on this earth, they can go out drinking and whoring and like they're like, "Oh no, I got you, bishop. Here's some money." Like, "Oh, you're forgiven." That doesn't sound like Christianity to me. Um so it's not necessarily the hierarchies that make it slave morality. It's the fact that if you go back far enough before there's any Christian influence on Europe, or for that matter, any Socratic influence on Europe, because really what Christianity is, it's Socratic thought mixed with the Judeo Christian, or let's say the Hebrew tradition, right? Because the Old Testament's still very different from the New Testament. Um, it's the combination of of that, like the Hebrew tradition and Socratic thought. Like I mentioned, the Greek morality changed a lot with Socratic thought, right? So, but if you go back far enough to any more pagan society, that was the ultimate expression of master morality. That was morality made by those in power. Like I said, with the Hebrew people, their morality comes from being in a position of servitude, comes from being in a position of slavery. They just happened to eventually be in a position of power. One day, the Christians were the slave, or not the slaves. The Christians were persecuted by the Romans. They just eventually found their way to the top of Roman society. But all
So
these,
so the I'm kind of I'm getting a little tired. So basically the
yeah,
similarity between the reason why it's a form of slave morality is because of could you
it's
just
because
make it really
it's
short?
because
Sorry.
it's all because it's just to summarize it, it's all rooted in a tradition of being a slave. Essentially,
Oh,
it's all
okay.
rooted in a from it's all rooted from position of weakness, or not
Yeah.
weakness in a bad way. I'm not trying to don't take
No,
this in a bad way. When I say slave and weak, I'm not saying this as a negative. It's just like it comes from a position of those who are powerless and how they interpret morality.
yeah, I guess like yeah, I guess what was it? I guess there is something interesting I would like to ask you because like something you
Mhm.
said is like you're not really what was it? What was the term you used when it comes to like moral absolutes?
Moral absolutism, moral relativism,
Yeah, yeah.
something
Like
like
we
that.
could talk about slave morality and liberalism. I think that's a whole
Yeah,
other subject on its own that we could talk. I think it's a whole other subject on its own that we could talk about. But
yeah, we can do another talk on that
yeah, yeah.
later
But
on.
I think something big I want to talk to you about is
Mm,
like for example, child adult relationships. Like to find
mm,
them less than ideal. But if
mm.
someone, let's say moral absolutism, if someone was to say like it is, make it like a morally absolute statement on the subject, how would you feel towards that? Because I think we do, as humans, we have intuitions of things that are very strong
Mhm.
to our nature. So, what is your thoughts on that? Just curious.
So I'm gonna say that from most people need moral absolutes in regards to these things. Most people need to take a more deontologist approach, like this is always wrong, this is always good, right? I think that's important for most people, but I think if you are a more intelligent being, you can look at something and realize something is wrong because of the consequences, something is wrong because of the context, something is wrong because of what it is. That nothing really is inherently wrong because the only way you can have something inherently wrong is if a God says it's inherently wrong. So I subscribe to that. I believe some things are inherently wrong because I have chosen to believe in God. I've chosen to be a Christian. But I recognize that if I wasn't a Christian, there would be nothing tying any of those things as right or wrong. But even without Christianity, I can look at something like pederasty, which is, man lovers, or
Oh, wait,
what's
aren't
the thing?
you?
Boy lovers.
Oh, wait,
What's that?
aren't you a Christian by the way, or are you?
Yeah, I am a Christian.
Okay.
I'm saying that I choose to be a Christian. I'm saying that even if I wasn't a Christian, I could call something like, pedophilia wrong. I just use the word pederasty because that's what was in Greek. In fact, pederasty was only really condemned after Socratic thought, which is quite interesting. So obviously, there's a lot of good things that come out of slave morality, right? Like, maybe the powerful people shouldn't rape boys. So obviously, there's a lot of, good to slave morality too, which is why it's nuanced. But in regards to something like pedophilia, I know that pedophilia is wrong because, well, a child's going to be traumatized. It's going to
Maybe
ruin.
so I like to use the word grape on here and speak in code
Okay,
because
yeah, sorry.
the
No, you're good.
overlords, the very non-slave morality overlords are not do not censor this
All
YouTube
right,
channel.
yeah, no, that's my bad. I'll use
No,
some
it's
better
okay.
words.
It's
So,
okay. It's okay.
okay,
Don't
so
worry.
pederasty. I can say pederasty because that's not a buzzword.
It's okay. Don't worry about
Um,
it. Don't worry about it.
okay. So, but I know that that's bad because a child, as they grow up, is not going to have a functional sexual relationship because of the things that happen to them. And I have personal experience with this because I had a girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend, who was, blanked as a child, not the full thing, but the other bad stuff. And it totally fucked up her relationship with me because it was hard for me to have a sexual relationship with her because that was always in the back of her mind. So I know that something like pederasty is wrong for those reasons. But like I think a lot of people have a problem when you say, okay, well, actually, this is wrong because of this, or this is wrong because of that. No, it's like, oh no, no, that's just wrong because it's wrong. Now I think that should be the case for most people because most people can't come to the conclusion that something is wrong because of this or that. So in most cases, you need to take a more deontologist approach, like this is always wrong or this is always right. But my answer to you is that I know that this thing is wrong because it leads to this or because
Hmm.
of this,
Even
and I
like I think even
so
I think even a deontologist could rationalize their rules and could follow reasoning behind it. But continue. Like I see what you're saying. Like
yeah.
it's easy to like fall into like lazy deontological
hmm
absolutes.
I mean, moral absolutes are the same things that lead because you can have bad moral absolutes too, right? Someone who says that it is inherent that like pederasty is wrong can also say that it is inherent that pederasty is right. Like look at Muhammad, for example, right? Muhammad had a 9-year-old wife, and that's the prophet for an
Uh,
entire religion.
yeah.
So my point is that you can't play moral absolutes even with things that are good because you can also look in the opposite things like genocides happen because of moral absolutes, right?
Yeah.
Moral absolutes can be very dangerous even if you're applying it to something that makes sense.
Yeah, like a good example of this is like you could have a neighbor or there could be somebody who you know, like a friend, a family member, who does a lot of good things, but then you find out that like that person has a sexual attraction to, let's say, minors, like in a hypothetical. Like let's
Mhm.
say in this hypothetical, like you know, it could be easy to see that person as something nothing more than what needs to be eradicated. But I think it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to also see that that's a human being who perhaps maybe a human being that can also still be reasoned with, talked to, and can also hopefully pursue some sort of help so they don't prey upon someone. Um,
I have a great quote when you're ready for
but
for
yeah,
what you're
it's
describing.
I remember like there was this video I saw by I think this guy called a hamburger. He's like a German socialist. He put out a
Mhm.
video basically talking about why Nazis should not be portrayed as a bad thing. And his
Mhm.
argument was the reason why you should never portray Nazis as bad is simply because what was like to short and summarize, is that when you see something as completely evil and completely bad, you forget that those who commit bad things are also capable of doing good things just like yourself. And the
Mhm.
moment you start to see something as absolutely bad, then you start to take away the perspective of your own actions and your own behaviors. Instead, you tend to focus it out on the outgroup. So yeah,
Mhm.
just like what you said, I really liked your response to what I brought up earlier. It's just it's a lot easier to dumb things down, but I think what was it? Absolutism to some extent can have some level of benefit. So yeah, I really enjoyed your
Yeah.
response.
Sure, and just to because you mentioned an interesting thing, like someone could be, like have a predilection or predilection. Is that the right word? Like they might be attracted to like minors, for example, right? And here's an interesting quote. And here's the thing in general. I'm gonna say a interesting perspective on things like that. I think the individual who has evil in their heart but chooses not to act on evil is the best kind of person because it's easy to be a good person if you don't have if you don't have a drive to do evil. Like it's easy for me to say, oh, this guy is attracted to kids, I fucking I'm gonna kill that guy as soon as possible, right? Even if he's done nothing wrong. Or this guy is a psychopath, oh, I'm gonna kill them, because like I'm not a psychopath, or I don't want to murder people. But in a lot of ways, the person who has murderous intentions and has to battle with that every day and chooses not to murder someone, the fact that they've killed nobody means more than me not killing anybody because I didn't have to fight those murderous intentions. And this quote right here, it's actually from Will to Power by Nietzsche. It's greatness of character does not consist in not having such passions. One must have them to the greatest degree, but held in check, and moreover, doing this with simplicity, not feeling any particular satisfaction thereby. What that means is the fact people that have a desire to do wrong, or like let's say someone's very lustful, they want to have sex with lots of people, or somebody you know, has a genetic disposition to be a drug addict, but they choose not to, that is the strongest person that could possibly exist. The person who has the drive to do something bad but doesn't do it. That is the strongest willpower someone can have. It's very easy to be a good person if you're just naturally good and you naturally don't have a mean bone in your body. But the best person and the person I will respect the most is the person who wants to do evil, like they have a natural genetic predilection to do evil, but they choose not to because they have the willpower to choose to do the right thing, even if they have the drive to do something bad.
Genetic and or some sort of upbringing.
Yeah, like environmental. Exactly.
I think maybe we should have another interview where we could talk more about like philosophy and martial arts some other time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I kind of want to end it here because this was.
Oh, you're good. I gotta wake up early anyway.
Yeah, this is a weekday, and this is almost now 3 hours. I thought this was gonna be a lot less than that. But no, this was actually great. This was great content.
I know I enjoyed the conversation a lot.
So for anyone that wants to get in contact with this guy's YouTube info, what other social media do you have?
So on my YouTube about page, it has a list of all the different sites I can be contacted. It has a link to my Discord server, to my Instagram. I don't really use Twitter at all, but I have it there just because. And I think that's about it. I also have my email on my about page. People want to reach out to me directly.
So I don't think we had that many sources that are going to be put in the description of this video, but in case I max them out, go to his YouTube channel.
Books. Yeah.
But well, actually no. Like if you mention something, like I might even like grab the. If you mention a source or a study, I'll put that in the description sometimes, or if you mention a person.
Yeah.
But with that being said, I'll try to put his social media in the description down below, as well as mine. But anyways, with that being said, do what you can to help the channel, everybody. Actually, wait, do you have any final thoughts you want to say?
No, just like thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's good to be able to collaborate with other content creators and have good philosophical discussions without yelling and without without hostility. It's good to have a nice, critically intuitive conversation.
So yeah. Yeah, I totally feel the same. So the other two things is like I like to talk more about philosophy and martial arts with you and masculinity.
Sure.
Next time you have you on. But for everyone in the description down below, everything's gonna be down there hopefully. But with that being said, do what you can do what you can to help the channel. Like, comment, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Remember to improve your mind, your body, but most importantly, your soul. But I'm nothing amazing. After all, I'm just history's shittiest disciple. And with that, have an amazing 24 hours.